And we're live!
We're here.
Live. We're here. How long has it been since, what? Last one was November, right?
Oh, fuck. It was like holiday season the last time we recorded one of these.
Yeah, jeez. It's been a minute. This is basically turned to like a biannual event when we do these, because let's think about it. 2016, we did, like what?
We did Ed, Ed and Eddie, we did Mission Hill.
No, we did Rocco and Michelle in 2016.
Yeah.
2017, we did Satoshi Kon, Ed, Ed and Eddie, Bakshi. And now here we are with the first one of 2018. 2018 is like more than half over. Well, let's introduce ourselves first. I'm Ahmad.
I'm Failmore.
And
I'm
we have a guest
Ming.
this time. That's
oh,
him.
sorry.
No, it's
Cut
okay.
in.
It's okay.
Ruined my own introduction. It's cool. I'm Meng. Hi.
Alright, what do you do, Meg?
I draw funny pictures, and you can follow me at MNGNTO at Twitter, and Mang, that's M-A-N-G, Nito, on Tumblr.
We'll link to his galleries in the description.
Please do.
Yes.
You're saying like you don't have more followers than both. You're like, please, I
I need them.
I gotta know.
I'm bleeding followers right now. But no.
Can we get these pictures up to 10,000 likes?
Bleeding followers because you showed up here.
We're gonna sink your reputation, man.
You just
This is a
ruined
trap.
my reputation. Everyone's gonna fucking hate me now.
Yeah, we're gonna make you talk about Mega Man again.
Oh yeah.
Fucking Korra.
He was on Termites. We
Jeez.
can't trust him no more. Alright, well, you kind of already alluded at what we're going to talk about. We're talking about two shows, which I guess we kind of done before. No, we've never done two shows in one thing. We've done like a few movies. Like the Bakshi one, the Toshi Kon one, we talked about multiple movies, but never two shows.
Yes.
And so we're talking... So last time we talked about Bakshi and all of his stuff, and now we're talking about TV shows again. We're talking about Avatar, The Last Airbender, and its sequel series, The Legend of Korra. And we debated for a while. We wanted to do Avatar because it's actually the 10th anniversary of when the show ended. The show ended in 2008, and it's 2018. And it actually just got a Blu-ray release. So if you want to watch the show, the entire series in nice HD quality, you can get the Blu-ray.
We're not being paid.
We're not being paid, but I like telling people where to go and find this stuff legally so they can enjoy it in the best possible quality. So when we did this, we were like, did we want to talk about Korra? Because Korra is a bit of an infamous show, and we wanted to talk about we want to talk about Avatar really badly because we're like, oh, we love that show, we've wanted to rewatch it for a while, and it's like let's do a podcast on that one. And then we're like, well, I guess if we're doing this, we have to talk about the sequel because it is part of the mythos. And I know there's comic books and stuff, but we're not really gonna get into that because
we don't give a shit about
we don't
those.
give a
Oh
shit.
yeah, fuck those.
And we never read any of them, and I don't think they should matter anyway.
Doesn't matter.
All right, so Avatar: The Last Airbender was created by Michael DiMartino and Brian Konietzko. I'm pretty sure that's how you say it. I'm sorry if that guy ever listened to this.
Sorry,
like fuck
Brian
up his name. My bad.
We fucked your stupid, hard to pronounce name up.
Your dumb idiot name.
Konietzko.
I don't know how you say that. I'm just gonna say Konietzko. We're gonna call him Bryke because the fandom calls them Bryke because it's Brian and Mike. So just for the sake of making it simple. So thank you, Avatar fans, for coming up with the name.
It's not a ship.
No, well, I mean that was the joke that they called it that because they were making fun of shipping, so they called him Brian.
I didn't even think about
that's
that.
That's not a joke. That's true.
Now this really is going to ruin my invitation.
All right, so Avatar it was a Nickelodeon adventure series that premiered in 2005, and it was the result of a really early pitch from 2001. They were working on this for a while. Apparently, the idea came from Konietzko, Brian. He was kind of just drawing people, and he saw this old man, and he thought it'd be funny if he drew him as like his balding old man. He drew him as like a kid, and he drew him herding buffalo, and the idea kind of went on from there. So him and his buddy, they were like, "Hey, what if we had this idea about like guys trapped in the South Pole or something?" Or like because we saw this documentary about it. So they kind of started to merge the ideas, and they put together this pitch, and they gave it to Nickelodeon a couple of months later. And so for a long time, the show was in production. They were putting this stuff together. They were getting things ready. So it took about 3 years until finally in 2004, they showed off the show to the public. People got excited. People were like, oh, wow, Nickelodeon's doing something this ambitious. And then in 2005, the show premiered to a pretty high, pretty big ratings. And it became a successful show ever since. It's won multiple awards. It's won an Emmy. It's won a Peabody Award, 2 Annie Awards. And it's been nominated for many more. For the show's animation and the show's impeccable sound design and the voice acting.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I didn't know it was nominated for all that. Like, I knew it was kind of like a prestigious show. Like, I heard a little bit about some of those awards I heard of. I didn't know it was, like, that big a deal, because to me it was that big a deal, like as a kid watching this. But
Yeah.
It was extremely successful from the very beginning. Like, when we were watching it, we were joking that the reason it didn't get canceled for being an action show was because it was winning too many awards.
Avatar's kind of like,
I don't know how true that is.
it's kind of like with 9/11, but instead of like the Twin Towers, everyone knows where they were when Avatar premiered.
No, I thought you were going to relate that to Korra somehow.
We'll get there. We're gonna get there. I got plenty to say about it.
We're getting there. Actually, it's funny because I do actually remember where I was when that show premiered. I was at my aunt's house because my mom owned the restaurant at the time, and every time she'd want to go there, and she'd pick me up from school, and I have to wait at my aunt's house, which is nearby, until we could go home. So then they premiered the show. It was like Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I was like, whoa, this is like, because you didn't see stuff like that on Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon had stuff like SpongeBob and like Teenage Robot, like not like serious action shows, and like
right.
The Cartoon Network had the serious action shows. You were like, they had like Teen Titans and stuff like that, or like Justice League. This and then I guess that inspired Nick to kind of step into the throw their hat in the ring, and they were like, hey, what if we tried our own kind of serious action show? So they came up with Avatar: The Last Airbender, and well, I guess, man, you're the guest, so you can kind of give your opinion on it. When you think about the show, how did it kind of what impact did it leave on you, you'd say?
That's one hell of a question to ask, man, because yeah, it really kind of is, because I wasn't used to watching a show like this. I missed out on like a lot of the staple action cartoons growing up as a kid. I kind of had like a sheltered lifestyle. My folks really didn't, like I say, let me watch Cartoon Network. They did, but I don't know. It was weird. I grew up in a weird household, so I never got to see stuff like Batman Beyond. I never got to see stuff like what was that show? The original Batman show that used to come on was a
Batman the Animated Series.
Yeah, I never got to see that. So Avatar was like the first real like action cartoon I think I really remember seeing, and I was blown away because at the time I was so used to shows like Cat Dog and Cat Dog and SpongeBob and all the like and all the other typical
the corny Nicktoons
Nickelodeon stuff. So to see like this show that was like, I remember as a kid, I was like, is this an anime? Like, did they get rights to an anime? And I remember I came home from school and I hadn't heard about it before it actually aired for the first time. Because they hyped it up for a bit and they showed like very little of it from the commercials. All you saw was like Sokka and Katara and a little bit of Aang, and they didn't really give you an idea of what it was about. At least not what I remember. So I came home from school and I watched it and I was completely blown away. And from then on, I was hooked. Like, this show, to me, it's hard to compare it to other shows because, in my opinion, there's no real, like, syndicated, like, animated show that's similar to it, if that makes any sense. And as far as, like, as an impact as it left on me, it really kind of just... Maybe artistically, it didn't take too much away from it, but the way the show told story and the way the show handled action scenes and managed to mingle everything in so seamlessly just really stuck with me. It almost kind of spoiled me in a way, because things that I watch now, anytime I see a fight scene in an animated cartoon, this is the show I compare it to. Anytime I see like some kind of intrigue or like some deep plot elements in a cartoon, I compare it to Avatar, and it kind of sucks because nothing has quite reached the level of Avatar. And I know it sounds like I'm just blowing smoke up the show's ass, but I remember watching and loving it, and when we rewatched it this summer, I fell in love with it all over again. So that's not just nostalgia speaking. I absolutely adore this show.
All right, strong words. Filmore, what do you think?
Well, it's funny you would bring it up as kind of a where were you when the show premiered type of thing, because I actually missed the show in its original run. I did not watch the show when it was on TV, throughout its original broadcast. And it was only many years later, I'd like to say, maybe 2009, 2010, something like that. Like
a little after it aired. Yeah,
after it was off the air that I got to watch it. And I was like, what the hell? Why didn't I see this when it was new, I was really kicking myself for not watching it, and I don't know why I didn't watch it. Because I did have Nickelodeon, so, joke's on me, I guess. But when I watched it for the first time, I'm like, kind of like you, I'm thinking to myself, this is really, really good storytelling, really, really good action. Everything is so tightly woven together. it's not even like one of those things where you can take the individual parts out of it. It all melts together. You can't describe one part of the show without describing some other part of the show. And that's how you can tell that you've got a really, really great kind of animated adventure story. Because so much of the storytelling is visual. And that's one of the things that stuck with me the most. Just the way that it conveys every single piece of information to you about what's going on, where it's happening, who it's happening to. It's captivating, it's engaging, it's intelligent, extremely intelligent.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
And it's completely, just like you said, completely unlike anything I think that we got on the air right now, and completely unlike anything that has been made here in the United States since. And calling back to another thing which you mentioned, you look at this like, oh, is this an anime? I actually kind of like that they took it upon themselves to basically say, we're not going to license some show from Japan. We're not going to pick up some old moldy adventure series and then air it like it's new. We're going to make our own, and we're going to make it even better. And they did. And I don't know exactly, what their motivation was, if that was really like what was going through their heads, but it's certainly what they did. They took up that mantle and they did a hell of a job. So after I got to watch the show for the first time, I'm like, damn, that was really good. And then we watched it again. I'm like, damn, it's really good. And then I'm able to kind of just appreciate so much of what it did even more now.
All right. So I would echo a lot of those sentiments. When I saw it, I was immediately like, this is the show where I'm like, every day when it's on, I will drop whatever I'm doing. I don't care. I will come home and watch this. I'd be out at like soccer practice and I would like want to leave because I'm like, no, Avatar's on. I gotta get home. No, and like my friends would like think similar too. I had friends like they would all want to go watch the show. It didn't matter what the hell you were into. A lot of people I knew, they were like, oh, dude, have you seen Avatar? You had to go watch Avatar. And then so we go. That was the show. Like every day, I would go home. Like I watched like Teen Titans as a kid. I was like, this show's all right. I thought it was cool when I was younger, and I was just like, Avatar's just like, it's so. There was nothing like it at the time. You guys like hit the nail on the head perfectly. It's like there was just nothing on the air that matched that kind of like level of detail and artistry and like storytelling. And then several years later, we still haven't had anything on that level for like an animated show for adults or kids or anybody really. I don't even think movies come on that level, like animated films have like reached that level yet, at least from the West. So I'm just like, it still blows me away to this day that we got Avatar on Nickelodeon of all networks. Like Nickelodeon, who will cancel anything at the drop of a hat, they managed to keep. I mean, it helps that Avatar was so successful, but
hence our joke.
But yeah, it kept going, and that's like so shocking to me, and like. Everybody loved it, and it was such a huge success, and I greatly consider it like a huge inspiration in a lot of ways. Just the thing that the directors of that show and the writers were doing, all the artistry that went into it is just stupendous. So I consider Avatar probably the best like American action series like ever made. Like it's in the realms of animation.
Yeah, like even individual elements of the show, like I mentioned before, you can't really pick individual things out, but you can use those as points of comparison, of course.
Yes.
Even stuff like the choreography. Nobody has approached that.
No, not even close.
Or even like finer details, like the way that they handle continuity.
Yeah.
We have so many shows that are trying to do stuff like that now, and they fall on their face, and then Avatar is just like, pirouetting from one plot point to the next, like it's nothing.
If I might interject, that's one thing I can't praise enough about this show is the choreography. Like, I'm pretty sure we could get into like this sort of, bit by bit sort of analysis of the show, but I just had to speak about it because if I don't, I'll never get to. I'll forget to talk about it.
Yeah, please.
But when I saw this show, and I forget the name of the episode, you'll forgive me for not remembering every single episode's name, but
it's fine.
It was early in season 1 where Zuko was chasing the Avatar, and he got the help of this assassin with like this weird beaver aardvark looking pet that could smell people through its nose and smell people through its nose, see people through its eyes. It can see through its smell. And there's a fight where they finally track him down in the middle of like this small, I think, like a village or something. I can't quite remember. It's not important. But what happens is there's a big fight that breaks out between Aang and Zuko, and they go all over the place. Like the fight takes all over the place. Because at first they start in the street, but then like they end up on the roof. And there's a lot of good fight scenes in this show, but this one takes the cake, and it stuck out to me then as a kid. It sticks out to me now. Zuko runs at Aang. He has like his hands at kind of like in this sword sort of position with the fire coming out of him. They fight for a little bit. They scuffle, and Aang has to like fight on this very, very thin ledge, and he has to dodge him.
Yeah,
and he managed. Yeah, he makes it work too. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
I'll get back to the point. I'm not going to get too off topic, but that's the other thing that I really praise about the choreography is they took a lot of different, I believe it's Chinese martial arts, and they made it not just work like straight up just martial arts, but they managed to put like this fantasy spin on it, and it seems perfectly into the characters, not just their personalities, but the bendings that they use. Because Aang has like a lot of circular motions in his moves, and he does a lot of flips and twirls, and it looks solid. Everything he does looks solid. It looks believable. It looks like something you'd see out of like a real kung fu movie. And what solid made that whole scene for me was he puts Zuko to the wall. He gets him off balance. Zuko looks up and he sees Aang doing the exact same pose that Zuko was doing, running straight at him, but he has like the wind like thing on his hand. Oh, it's so sick. And then they start fighting around a well, and Aang has to like contort his body to dodge Zuko's fire while like still standing on the well. And it's like, this is some Kung Pao shit.
So the show's choreography was actually done by actual martial arts masters. They went to the Sifu Kisu.
That's his name.
Basically the masters of the Harmonious Fist Chinese Athletic Association. So it's just like these dudes who do kung fu for a living. And they went to them and they're like, "Hey, can you help us figure out our fighting styles for this show? Because we want, a lot of our shows rooted in like Asian mythology and mysticism and ways and like fighting styles." So they're like, "Yeah, sure." So they kind of had 4 different fighting styles for each like 4 elements. So water bending is based on like Tai Chi, which technically isn't a fighting style, but you know what I mean. The idea of moving around and motion and movement was kind of what they were going for. Earth bending is based on like the strong style, like Hungar. Fire bending is based on Northern Shaolin, and air bending is based on Bagua, which is like this really kind of free-moving, free kind of fighting style. So, yeah, you see that with a lot. That's something they always go for in the shows, that they always try to make everybody's choreography like really represent not only just their powers and elements, but also just like where they're from. Like these guys are in a swamp, so they're gonna fight with like what's around. They're gonna fight with like the water and the vines in the water. I'm sorry, the water in the vines and move them around. You're gonna have these guys who bend sand. Everything they do is structured around that. So not only do you have like really complex choreography with how characters move around, but also the way they use their environment, the way they approach a different situation. Even the ways characters like don't even bend do stuff. There's or characters who just choose not to bend. Like the time Zuko was the blue spirit.
Right.
Yeah, he's got the mask on.
He's got the 2 swords, and he's just whipping ass. And he's just because it shows how skilled he is, even without firebending. Because it's not about firebending; it's about the moves they use to firebend.
And remember, not to cut you off, but to add on to that, you mentioned like how non-benders or people who choose not to bend fight. Mm-hmm. I thought that was shown like perfectly during the Eclipse episode, where the firebending gets turned off. And Azula has to hold her own, and she makes it work, flawlessly.
Yes, she avoids them perfectly.
Well, I think that I would like to add also is, you're mentioning using the environment, and Mang brought up that one particular episode where it seems like they're going everywhere, but if memory serves, you can correct me if I'm wrong, most of it is confined to that courtyard and the buildings surrounding it.
Yes, it's not a huge village.
It looks like they're going everywhere, but they're really the entire fight is taking place in different parts of a single location. And even then, they're using their environment. And that's like a cornerstone of good action, is that it's not just characters fighting in a flat plane, it's characters interacting with the world around them, and in ways that do not necessarily involve their superpowers.
Yeah. It's it was reminiscent of kung fu movies. Like you think of especially like Jackie Chan ones. He's using like every part of it to move around and get around at people, and then like not only just for fighting, but also for like physical comedy and stuff like that. So you see that in this. They're definitely pulling from that. Because Bryke, both of them were huge fans of kung fu movies and just martial arts in general. So they went out of their way to find people who could bring that to the show, and so that's why you have such a really great understanding of that in the action. Yeah, like the part with the well was very Jackie Chan, and then speaking of the Blue Spirit, there's that one the one episode where Zuko's busting Aang out because. Was it Zhao has captured him? Admiral Zhao has taken him in. And they're in the the first time you see the Blue Spirit.
Yeah, and he's like, they're escaping, and they have these ladders, these tall ladders they're using almost like stilts, and they're going end over end to get over this big wall. And I'm just like, how did they even think of this? That is so great. But again, just using things around them, things that are just there to their advantage, and being really creative about it. Not just in the context of, the story and the scene and the characters, but just visually. It's such a captivating thing to see.
Even early on, they do that really well. Like the first episode where he first fights Zuko, he wraps him up in the flag and like throws him around the room. It's like it's just genius the way they think of things. It's like you sit there and see like, yeah, it's cool. It's just a flag in the room, and then they just grab it and use it. Like, you won't expect that. It's like, whoa. He's like, they're actually using stuff around them, and the show, and it stays so consistent over time.
That's one thing that I really kind of praise about this show. That a lot of, like I said, it's hard to compare it to anything other than anime because it's kind of hard to get just like an action show that's kind of for this demographic that isn't an anime. But
we don't make them.
We just don't make them, yeah.
Just don't make them.
But yeah, like there's a moment, like you said, when he like wraps him up in the flag and does like throws them all across the room. This show is really smart about how it chooses to represent each of the bending in the universe because it never feels like one is strictly better than the other. There's no like power leveling. There's no like, well, to a point. There's no like weird like shit where they get like super technical into like how certain bending works. They don't go into that. What's that cells in like the Jedis and Star Wars? They don't do none of that.
Midichlorians?
They don't do midichlorians. They don't bother with that shit. A lot of the powers, like, yeah, like it's like fantasy shit, but it feels real. In the universe, it feels like it's normal to everyone so that someone can bend. So people know how to fight against benders. Some people don't even need bending to fight. It's the way this show handles powers is probably better than I think any other show I've seen that has characters that have supernatural powers. Just because of not only are they good for the fights, but they're useful like in their application because an entire city is just built out of people using earthbending as just like a casual thing, and like the entire water tribes like used waterbending. I think it was a northern one. Was it the northern? Yeah,
they made it there. Everything's made of ice.
Everything's made of ice. They
move their boats with it too.
Yeah, the boats are moved with it. It's such an ingenious thing, and it uses such a basic sort of skill set, like can control the elements, but it makes it fun. It makes it fun to look at, because especially when it's interwoven with martial arts. Martial arts is badass as it is. All you need to do is add a little bit of that fire to the end of it, and it's like, damn, man. Like, I'm trying to think, and I don't want to get like too far into like the other show, but that's a good reason to why Avatar, The Last Airbender, sticks out to me. Is just not just the powers, it's how it's implemented, and they never feel like a character is represented by their power. For the most part, it feels like they're still characters and that's their ability, but it never really felt like, oh, Aang, he's the guy with the super air power and he gets to go super air Saiyan or anything like that. Even though he does do both of those things.
He sort of does, but there's a logistical reason for it that works, and it helps that it's at the end of the show.
Yeah.
It's because he's the Avatar, not because he's an airbender.
Yeah.
So, I guess we can use it to get into the world design of the show, film, where that's kind of more your room, so go for it.
Well, the thing that Meng was touching on that I think is even more impressive from a, how did you think of that kind of world-building perspective than just using the powers for martial arts as they use them practically. And a thing that kind of bothers me about a lot of fantasy stuff in general, like I'm not going to get into too many particulars other than a certain other show that we'll cover here in a little bit. Their powers feel like part of the world, and they use their abilities to shape the world around them. Sometimes very much literally, like you were saying, the Earthbenders built their cities that way. The Fire Nation has very advanced metallurgy. They use their fire to actually power machinery. We see that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just all kinds of stuff. And like, if you think about that, and you ask yourself, if I could control an element, what would I do with it? You're eventually going to get into, the nitty-gritty of your daily life or your job. And that's exactly what they did, and they made it fun. It's like, that's really creative. That's really interesting what they're doing. And the other thing, too, is that every individual region has its own kind of unique character, and you probably recall more of the particulars about this than I do, Ahmad. So, what individual regions are based on. I know the Earth Kingdom is based on China, largely.
It's mostly based on China, with a tiny dash of Korea in there.
Fire Nation's more Japan.
Yeah, a little bit of
definitely.
India too. That's definitely Japan the most. Water Tribe is, obviously like Inuits and Eskimos, and Air is kind of like I guess
like the Tibetan.
Yeah, I was thinking more like Tibet.
Yeah.
Which is kind of when you think about that, it's kind of really disturbing parallel.
Damn, you're right. Like especially not to mention like the Japanese or the Fire Nation. Like damn.
Yeah, and they're like invading China. It's like
But
maybe it's best that it got made here.
Yep. Yeah. If I recall, let me see. The cultural consultant, they had a couple on the show, and they had Edwin Zane and a calligrapher named Siu Leong Lee. So they basically here's how the show's gonna look, here's how the writing's gonna look, here's how everything is gonna look. They use a lot of Chinese characters for the most part. I think it's pretty much all they use for the show, for text inside the show.
I believe so.
Yes. So I couldn't find much information. I'm sure that the Chinese is pretty accurate because I haven't seen people complaining about it. Usually when you look up stuff about different shows or movies or games or whatever, but they do something in different language. We're going off tangent. We were playing Max Payne 3 recently, and that game is Portuguese a lot in it, and the Portuguese in it is apparently awful. So it can go really wrong if you know what you're doing, but they seem to really understand, and they did the smart thing and get people who actually knew what they were doing to come and help.
They cared enough to make it accurate, even though it's not something you have to know in order to enjoy or understand the show.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's just, yet again, incredible attention to detail. Back to the original point though, is it's a adventure that takes you all the way around the world. Every part of the world is visited, and all four of the different nations, you go through them one by one. You have little offshoot regions that are just kind of their own thing. The foggy swamp that has the swamp waterbenders that you were talking about. There's an island that has some random firebenders that are based on Aztecs / Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
They're just their own thing. That every place that they go has its own character, it has its own aesthetic, and it never feels like they're just taking, lopping off part of a culture and putting it on something else. Here's your China hat, here's your Japan hat. They don't do that. There are no hats here. They got the whole costume, and it's one that's both inspired very heavily by the real world, but also feels like its own thing.
Yes, it feels like a real fantasy world they put a lot of thought into.
Yeah. Short of having Conlang or something, some kind of nonsense like that. That's the only other way that you could have taken this even further.
It feels like a lot of the show was made in mind where they built the universe first and then built characters to live in it.
For sure.
It's probably, that's how a lot of shows are written, but it really stands out here because there's no real character in Avatar where I felt like, well, why are they here? What's this person supposed to be doing? What's their point here? Every single character felt like a resident.
Yeah.
They felt like they lived here. You could believe that the fact that they were that no one felt alien in this show, and that's kind of what I really like about it. Is even though the characters have these fantastical abilities, they feel like they belong in the world they live in. You could see some of these people going to a tea shop in a sense.
Yes.
Even the bad guys that get a huge amount of characterization. Even the bastard characters get characterization. There's an episode where I hate to go from world building to characters, but that's how good this show is.
Yeah, we can go. Yeah,
where it just weaves everything in such a flawless manner. And there was an episode where it's towards the end where Katara and Zuko go to get revenge on her mother's a killer. And even they give this nobody some minor characterization. They make him a coward. And it's a lot of fun. The fact that they go all around the world is kind of something that I guess you could say happens in some anime, but here it really does feel like a world. It doesn't just feel like they're having a little vacation in a certain spot. It feels like they actually are going from one civilization to the next civilization, and the people there are different, and better yet, you can see how the Fire Nation has affected all these different civilizations. Even some of the ones that are doing really well, supposedly Ba Sing Se, to these nowhere sort of villagers who are just getting completely raised by them. It's really kind of an interesting narrative that they could manage to pull with such a huge scale too, but they managed to just make it work.
This is definitely a good way of putting it. The thing that stands out the most to me, it's you have this world where they go through this world and everything's like so fantastical and fun, and they introduce you to so many cool characters. But they do such a great job of reinforcing the point of the story every single time. Like what you said with like, here's all the different ways the Fire Nation have fucked over these people. And they always show that. It's like, even their own, Fire Nation's like, they fuck over their own people. There's a part where they have the kind of Lady in the Water episode. And they have this little village that's being polluted by a Fire Nation factory nearby. Even though they're Fire Nation citizens, they won't help them. And they can't fish anymore, so all the people are starving. So they have to help them. And then they go around, or like they find this school that's like culturally oppressed and they can't have fun. So let's take these guys and have a party. Let's do stuff like that. Or like let's go, or like these Earthbenders are being kept on a ship and there's nothing but metal and they can't bend anything.
They're like prisoners of war or something.
Yeah, it's like there's so many different ways of like, here's a new location while still making it clear what we're doing here, why we're doing it, and who needs to be stopped.
And to give some much needed context to this, in the event that you have not seen Avatar or you're not aware of what it is, fundamentally it is a war story.
Yes, which is kind of an amazing, again, is aired on Nickelodeon for children.
Yeah, they get into some deep dark shit right off the bat. And it's what's going on in the world is that there has been a war happening for 100 years.
Yes.
Where the Fire Nation has been invading and attacking everybody else. They're fucking everything up, and I'm not going to get too far into that, but that's basically like the context of what's happening. Our heroes need to get their shit together. They have Aang, who is the Avatar, who can use all the elements, and he has some kind of weird place in their world. You know, he's kind of a chosen one thing. But he doesn't get everything handed to him. He's got to learn, and he's got to become part of the world that he's going to save. And they got to stop the leader of the Fire Nation, who's going to fuck everything up again. And that's pretty much what the whole thing is about. And from that premise, they created this gigantic globe-trotting adventure. And yeah.
It tells you something different like every single time. So I guess we'll just get into the characters a bit. Mang, who would you say is your favorite character in the show?
Oh man, why do I got?
That's a big order.
Why do you gotta fucking ask me that question? I've been getting nothing but hard questions tonight. Okay, so like if I had to choose just one singular character, I'm going to have to go with Zuko, and I know that's an easy choice to make. No, I say an easy choice to make. Maybe that's a popular choice to make. But it's not an easy one. I'll go into why it ain't. But I have to say Zuko because I don't watch like a ton of anime. I've seen a handful of stuff I consider to be good. Even movies don't have the level of character development that this dude gets. Like, Zuko is one of those characters that gets put through the ringer, and he comes out a better person for it in the best possible way, because he doesn't like his whole face. Is it face? No, it's heel face turn. There we go. His whole redemption arc is one of the most powerful redemption arcs I think I've seen in something, because of how much this dude has to sacrifice in order to find like himself again, because that's his real reason for having to hunt the Avatar. It's not necessarily, you know, on Fire Nation orders. It's not necessarily because his dad said so. It's not even really so he can go back to the Fire Nation. It's to find himself. He's a young man who basically has nobody in the world besides like his uncle, right? Yeah, his uncle, his not girlfriend, and that's kind of it. So you don't necessarily get that impression from Zuko at the start. He kind of just seems like your big bad guy. But even when he's still a bad guy, he gets so much development. And he gets played straight more than a lot of the other characters do, but they still have a lot of fun with him. Yeah, and that's one
goofy moments.
That's one thing I also kind of like about the characters in this show. Like, even though it's kind of a dark, it's a war story at the end of the day, with child soldiers as the main character, but the show never feels burdensome about that.
Yeah, it's
even
not overbearing.
Zuko's darker moments never feel burdensome. And there's one episode in particular that I think really kind of made me like him a little bit more, because I don't remember watching it during the original run, is the beach episode. Funny enough, it starts out like a normal beach episode, but then it gets into like Zuko's psyche a little bit, and how he interacts with like the people he's supposed to be friends with. And he even says it straight up. He's like, his friends just ask him, who are you mad at? And he's just, I don't know, maybe myself. And he gets, it's kind of a bummer watching any other show that has a villain that's kind of interesting, because then I think, I wonder if they're going to do a Zuko thing, and it never quite happens.
No.
It's kind of funny because what I like about him so much isn't just so much his interactions with his uncle, but also the very few interactions he has with Aang are kind of interesting. If not just because of they're kind of similar characters. They're mirrors of each other because they're both young men. They're both basically teenagers that are in charge of something pretty damn important. And I know Zuko isn't necessarily the last of his line, but he's kind of like one of the few people in the Fire Nation besides Uncle Iroh that, well, I'll say in the Fire Nation, more in the Fire Nation army, that kind of has a bit of a conscience because he doesn't necessarily like Aang at the start, but I always got the impression he just saw him as an end goal. He never really like he did have animosity towards him, but it was more in the sense of like, I need to get this guy so I can finally redeem myself and maybe I can finally become somebody. So
it wasn't personal.
Yeah. So to see him finally get that sort of redemption that he was looking for, not so much in capturing the Avatar, but finding a way to bring this fucked up world back into balance, was something I had never seen before in a cartoon. Much like a cartoon, much less I'd seen anything before. I wasn't used to like the villain becoming the good guy, and more or less watching a show that focuses on a villain character as much as it did, and giving him so much depth. Because it's kind of hard to describe Zuko. It's harder to describe any of these characters in one word, much less him. And even characters I don't typically like, I ended up liking at the end, because I remember as a kid I didn't care much for Katara until I watched it the second time around with you guys, until I realized like she's kind of like a troubled kid, really, but she comes off as like realistic. Like even when she's like whiny, she comes off as none of the characters seem overbearing is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And I'll let you pass on your insight, but there's one thing I wanted to point out when you talked about the characters. And we kind of talked about the story just a little bit. There's one thing that always stuck out to me, and I was watching this and I kept a mindful eye of it every single time we watched an episode together, was there's no Deus Ex Machinas in this show.
No.
Every single time one of the characters manages to succeed, it's because they managed to pull it off. And you get the impression that these are actually some smart-ass motherfucking kids. They do some shit, it's mostly due to Sokka, but other characters too. Yeah, I'm gonna give Sokka like some credit, but I'm pretty sure one of you wants to talk about him, so I'll let y'all do that. But there's no moments where it's just like, oh well, that came out of nowhere to save him, outside of like maybe one or two. But at that point, you're accustomed to the show justifying their successes so many times that when something kind of comes out the blue, you're just like, okay, yeah, you can suspend your disbelief long enough to let that happen. The characters in this show are, I'm not going to say like it's like the most insightful characters, the smartest characters ever, but they're a lot more ingenious than I gave them credit for when I watched it for the first time. Even the second time around, there are times where I was actually really invested anytime there was a conflict. I was like, how are they going to make this work? How are they going to get out of this? Like you actually feel suspense when some suspenseful shit's going down. That's kind of a hard thing to get someone to feel. Like this sense like, oh, maybe they actually will fail here. That's a hard thing to get into like a character action show like this.
I liked what you said earlier a lot about, I agree with everything you said. But the thing that stuck out to me is that the show is a lot about like fate and the idea that like things aren't just set in stone, that you can change what happens. And like you have you put up the whole parallel between Aang and Zuko, and like they pretty much are extremely similar characters. You have these two characters who are riddled with guilt, and then they want to redeem themselves for what they've done. And there's a point where they both kind of say the line, like, I need to restore my honor and stuff like that. You have Aang, who ran away when he wasn't supposed to, and because of that, the whole world was plunged in the war because he wasn't there to stop it. And then you have Zuko, who feels the need to redeem himself from his dad's eyes and the eyes of his nation. So you have these two characters who are fighting with themselves constantly to try to figure out what they need to do, and as a result, they keep improving and improving. So that's one thing I just really have to praise the show for, is representing its themes through these characters like perfectly. But for me, for a long time, I wasn't sure what my favorite character was. For a long time, I kept saying it was Toph because I just thought she was the coolest character, and I still like her a lot.
She's still
a really cool character. But in terms of like character progression, she's kind of easily the most static, which is fine. That's not really the point of her. She's meant to be a little goofier than the other characters, but she still gets a lot of like gets a lot of play, and she still involves a lot as a character.
Oh yeah.
But
she also gets introduced very late, just to be clear.
Exactly. She gets introduced a little bit in the season 2, so to be fair, and a show that's only 3 seasons long. And then you have then for a while I was like, is it Sokka? Because Sokka's a really interesting character, and Zuko's great too. But I guess I'm gonna have to say Sokka. He's my favorite. The more I watched this, the second watch through, I was like, I really like this character. Is like his humor and just the way he like goes about things, but also just the way he like. I've never seen a show pull off the whole. Here's the goofy character. Watch him be evolve into this more serious, like likable, competent character, but he's still a goofball at the end of the day. And it manages to strike that balance like perfectly. I don't think I can ever say that a show has done that. At least none that I've seen anyway. Sokka's always like he starts out, he's kind of unsure of himself. He's really goofy. He's a little cocky, and he's like, all right, here's how I'm going to do things, and we're going to do it my way. And he learns that things don't quite work that way. But then you're just like, oh, he's a hothead. It's like he's a goofball. And then you learn over time, it's like, oh, he's like, he really wants to be like his dad, or he really wants to like protect Katara, his sister, and his tribe. And it's just like you really start to feel for him on that level. And then watching him grow and realizing like, oh man, I can't do anything. I'm just, I don't have any powers. And then he's like, wait a minute, fuck that. I'm actually the smartest dude here. I know how to build traps. I invented the air balloon, which something to show.
Forgetting that.
Yeah, in the universe of Avatar, he co-created the air balloon.
Hot air balloon.
The hot air balloon. Sorry, the hot air balloon. And then you have, he goes out of his way, and when they're in the Fire Nation, the 3rd season, he goes to meet this like sword master. He brings him a meteorite and has it forged into a sword, and he learns how to fight with a sword. Granted, he doesn't do it too much because by that point the show's nearly over. But still, it's cool that he does get to make use of it. But yeah, he's just master tech. He learns to be a great tactician. He learns to keep the team together, and he's kind of just like a bit of like the moral center in a lot of ways. The straight man, more so than you would think Katara would be. So yeah, I think I really like Sokka. Just seeing he has kind of a similar redemption arc, quote unquote, to like Aang and Zuko. Not as pronounced and not as like serious, but definitely like really like well done and like likable and relatable to me at least. So
I think it's really interesting you brought up the episode with Sokka getting his sword, because I think that like exemplifies his strengths.
Yes.
Maybe like to the most literal amount, because even his master says like the way you think makes you the best student I've ever had. Not necessarily because you're strong, not necessarily because you're a sword master, but because he thinks out of the box, and that's pretty much the reason they've been able to succeed as much as they have.
Yes.
That's the reason they were able to save their dad.
Like all the characters are resourceful, and I think that's the important thing to note. And we were hinting at that earlier with the way the show uses its environment, but characters being resourceful in general is a staple of this, but Sokka is oftentimes far and away the most resourceful of them all, and it's really, like, what he's going through is really less of a redemption arc and more of him growing up and realizing that he's not a loser.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the reason why I say it's redemption arc, because he's redeeming himself, because he's like, I goofed up, I lost all the people in my tribe, all the waterbenders got killed, and he feels
guilt for not being able to do something about that, even if it's unjustified.
Yeah,
exactly. Or the moments where he loses his dad, and during the Eclipse invasion, and like the entire time he's like, shit, I screwed it all up. I gotta get my dad back. I gotta fix this. I gotta set this back.
Yeah, there's stuff that he wants to fix and that he wants to make up for, but a lot of it is just him kind of becoming an adult.
Yes, he wants to take responsibility for things.
And if I had to say that I had a favorite character, well, you guys kind of took mine, both of them. I like all the characters though, and I'm going to cheat a little. Instead of talking about a specific character, I'm going to say what I like about the character, our main cast in general.
Okay.
Nobody is just a cliche.
No.
Nobody's just a trope.
They may start that way, but...
Yeah, they start kind of like that, but nobody sticks to their archetype for really longer than the first few scenes they're in.
Yeah.
Usually if you have a show that's going to have a character like Sokka, he's going to be like the nerdy, we're going to pretend this guy's useful and give him something to do in the script kind of character. Surely to God, you guys can think of a few on your own. But,
there's one in the sister series.
Oh boy. Zuko, another great example of that, because when he shows up, he looks like a little barbarian. He's like, he It's great too because that factors into his characterization so much because he's overcompensating so hard.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, oh, there's actually a good reason why he's doing this, and it informs you as to his personality. And the way the characters grow, and all of them do, is really, really impressive, and it takes them further and further out of their archetype until finally you just cannot quite describe any one of them with just, here's a cliche or here's a trope that describes them. Even a character like Iroh, who's like the closest to that because he's the wise old man type character, he has a lot going on, and he gets a lot of characterization beyond just being the guy that gives advice.
I mean, he has the whole like kind of past where you learn that he killed a bunch of dragons, and he tried to destroy Ba Sing Se, but then like he was like, wait,
he used to be a general. He was a Fire Nation general in this horrible, horrible war who has done a lot of pretty awful shit, and then he grew to feel very guilty about that after losing his son, and he's like, oh, this is what I've been doing to the world. Damn. And you find that out about him, like, when is that, season 2?
I want to say yes.
I think so.
Yeah, it's a little ways into the show, you start finding out, like, why he is the way that he is, why he's helping Zuko kind of, escape the destiny that's been laid out before him by his father and by his country. All that good stuff. Nobody is just a walking cliche. Nobody's just a walking, here's my default character. Here's my default character costume I'm going to wear for the entire show. So they all wind up feeling very human. And I'm going to actually give honorable mention here, very honorable mention, to Katara. Because there's one episode in particular in Season 3 where the kind of the running gag is that she's sort of mother-henning the entire group. But as they start to delve into this whole point, because like there's like a B plot of Toph running around town pulling a bunch of scams.
Yeah.
Like this fucking Ed and Eddie shit's going on, and she's doing that to make money. But the whole thing with Katara is that she had to grow up so quickly. She they lost their mother, father had to go to war. She's been taking care of the family, and there's this great little moment where Sokka and Toph are kind of talking about that. And just little moments like that just fill in so much about these characters and really get you into their heads.
For sure.
Yeah. And seeing like why she is the way that she is makes her so much less of a, cardboard cutout. You could have easily had the teen mom trope. Like, I'm going to take care of all my friends or whatever, the party of adventurers that I'm with. But instead, she's a person. And she's growing up too. Everybody grows up a whole lot.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's like the most relatable thing about the show, especially when you're younger, when you see it, where it's like, oh yeah, it is like growing up and not necessarily not becoming a kid anymore, but becoming a better person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like another great example, Aang learning not to run away from, confrontation stuff, like how to assert himself, not only embracing his destiny, but more importantly, learning why it's important that he does and becoming committed to that on his own terms.
It's even like baked into his fighting style, where early on he's really evasive and doesn't want to necessarily like directly confront anybody, but over time it's like, I gotta be more aggressive, I gotta learn to think outside the box, I gotta be better than what I was before, which is essentially a coward. Yeah,
and he even has, a lot of moments where, I know when we were watching it, a lot of people were like, okay, it's out of character Aang again, and I kind of interpreted it a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm reading too much between the lines, maybe it was just some weak writing, but I always figured that his, anytime that he got really kind of like antisocial, it's like he has a lot of difficulty processing negative emotions.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't know how to deal with that shit, and he gets overwhelmed and it comes out in a really bad way. But then by the end of the show, he's like, okay, I'm confident, I'm going to deal with this, and I'm going to confront the bad guy, and I'm going to confront all this other stuff that's going to happen, and I'm going to, do the thing.
A good example is when he loses Appa in the desert, and he's like so like...
He has really been out of shape.
Yeah, he's enraged, and he's like, he doesn't know how to deal with it.
It's kind of funny you mentioned that, because early on in the series, you mentioned that he's kind of evasive. He's even kind of like that in his dialogue. If you notice, like, in the first episode, like, he kind of... The way he talks is kind of weird. I guess you could just chalk it up to, again, first episode. That's just probably how it's going to be written. But I remember when they get to the Air Temple, and, they find out everyone's dead, you can tell he probably already knows that, but he kind of talks in a way that's very, accept it. So he kind of grows up.
Maybe everything's okay.
Like you said, this show really is about growing up. But the characters grow up in ways that are significant to them. Because Aang learns how to assert himself, like you said. Sokka learns to kind of trust in himself. And Katara, she's kind of a weird egg, but you can see like a lot of growth in her too. She kind of becomes. It's really hard because she sort of becomes her own person, and she doesn't really start.
She becomes her own person.
Much like that, but I noticed like she really kind of pulled like a huge, not like a 180, but I sort of noticed like her development in the episode where they go to the Fire Nation little floating town that's getting polluted, and she becomes I think it's like the Pale Lady or something.
Yes.
Yeah, just her need to want to help people shows probably the most in that episode more than any other episode. But like I said, I remember when we were watching this, like she's bloodthirsty. Like maybe out of more than anybody else like on Team Avatar. I feel like she comes close to like killing the person who killed her mother. She could have killed Azula easily. Like it's kind of interesting that they chose a character like her to be the most, I don't want to say vicious, but you know, the most just bloodthirsty character, because she learns bloodbending, which is kind of OP, but she realizes that. She realizes, oh, that's kind of fucked up, so she chooses not to do it. Which is interesting for a character like her that has the aggression that she has to choose to not use such a power like that is pretty impressive. Right.
I think that's kind of the idea behind her. It's like it's similar to some of the characters in the show, but it's like she has like these emotions of like I have to hold it together for everybody else's sake, but like sometimes I just want to let loose and just show everybody how angry I am. So I think it's her kind of getting over that and realizing it's not an appropriate way to act. It's just kind of just a destructive mentality.
Well, she's more emotional in general.
Yes.
And it's, a lot of her growth is learning how to manage relationships with other people, which is why it's more difficult to characterize. But then when it comes to her having, like, kind of figuring her own disposition out and asserting her own version of right and wrong, that doesn't come up a whole lot. But when it does, it's especially impactful because she is the character that's like, she's very sensitive, she's very in tune with the needs of her friends and the people she cares about. So seeing somebody like that, who really is kind of the mother of the team, so to speak, act that way, it's like, it doesn't feel like it came out of nowhere, and that's why it's even more jarring.
Yeah.
It's not jarring in a way where it's like, this is really out of character. It's like, oh, this is what happens when you bottle this shit up.
Yeah. Like, Katara's... I know we talked to, like, all of our favorite characters, but Katara is really interesting because, to me anyway, because of how she's handled and how her character, quote-unquote, archetype is handled. It's really kind of easy to mess up, like, a very emotional sort of character, like a character that's got a lot of, like, emotional damage and baggage. Like, usually, if it's done wrong, they'll come off as sort of whiny, or they'll come off as, like, where did that come from? Or like, why did you do it this way? But even though she's emotional, she never seems, or if I don't remember, she never came off as irrational.
Yeah.
She never did anything stupid. There was never a moment where I was just like, Katara, you doing that again, huh?
Well, you being dumb.
It felt emotional. And that's one thing that I feel like a lot of shows miss, or at least a lot of cartoons that try to do this sort of character archetype. The sort of like damaged... like I've got a lot of baggage around me, and I've got to keep it together for the sake of everyone else around me, but I can't do it all the time. She doesn't come off as irrational. She doesn't do or ruin anything, because that seems to be a really, really common writing trope to do for a character like that, is to have them become emotional or have them become, kind of inconsolable at a moment where they really need to have their shit together. And
like Peter Quill.
They never quite do anything like that, and that's really refreshing to see, because even for a character like her, she knew, like, when the shit hits the fan, it's time to get going, and it showed. Like, even like her emotional side comes off, not just her being this sort of like pent up and angry, but she had a what's the word I'm looking for? She had a very strong sense of righteousness.
Yeah,
maybe even more than Aang, because there's an episode where she decides to get captured and put on a earthbending, a firebender. Wow, let's try that again. She gets captured and puts on a Fire Nation ship that's full of earthbenders that they captured just to rescue them. And she does this pretty much, well, not by herself, but kind of with just the help of her.
She inspires them to fight back.
She inspires them to fight back, and it doesn't almost work, but it works. I'm not going to try to deny that. It works. She manages to make it work. And that's what I liked about Katara. Like, to have that sort of justice sort of character is refreshing to see in a character that's not the main character.
For sure.
If that makes any sense. It felt natural, too, especially considering what she went through. Like, the Fire Nation came and, like, killed half the population. So it makes sense for her character to be kind of vindictive. And they kind of, that's what I said, I think that's where a lot of her blood rage kind of comes in. But
like when she sees Zuko and she like hates him initially when he tries to join their team.
Oh yeah, she pretty much says if you step out of line one time, that's going to be your last mistake.
All right, well, I think the last thing we should talk about is like of Avatar. The Last Airbender is probably the animations. We got on the choreography, but I think one thing people don't talk about too much with this show, and I just wanted to bring it up, is like I think if this show did not have the effects animation it had, I don't think it would be anywhere. I don't think it'd be half as good as what it is. Like the more I watched, because when I was a kid, I thought about how cool the choreography and stuff was. And I still think it's amazing. I still think that's a lot of what makes the show great. But the other half is like the effects are like the stuff they're doing in the show is like those guys. They're kind of hard to find stuff on because I tried researching their names. I'm gonna try again before this, and I'll look up stuff and put it in the description maybe. But yeah, the effects animation on the show is like phenomenal, and it keeps like getting better and better as the show progresses. The way water moves around, the way Earth appears, no effects are like ever the same. That's something I really appreciate, and something that the next show we're about to talk about gets completely wrong.
Oh man,
They have so many complex wave emotions and so many like big blasts of fire that look so interesting and varied. And you see the animation by itself, the effects animation is on its own, like on its own little layer with none of the characters there, and it feels like it tells the story just perfectly. Like it tells the story of the fight just as well on its own.
It becomes part of the character that is using the power that is in play.
Yes.
As you said, it's especially apparent with the water stuff, and not just because it looks probably the best out of all of it. And to us, it's impressive because it's incredibly hard to animate.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's what effect they're having on their environment in the form of these effects is directly tied to what they're doing. It's not just well, here's some foreshadowing and just punch, here's some fire, punch.
Yeah, they're not shooting blasts of like energy.
They're not doing DBZ
like,
shit.
It's not just here's my water gun. Like they managed to do some pretty interesting shit. Like they do like some Frozone shit with that. Like on top of it, like even the fire. Like it's kind of funny when you were talking about kind of how the story goes. But I mentioned this when we watched it. I believe that the reason Aang learns the fire last as an ability is because all the other elements have a lot more, let's call it, utility. And they have to think a little bit more outside the box in order to use them in a fight.
Yes.
And not only because of that, but like the animations, like you said, like with the water is really impressive. But where I really like seeing the most in the show was probably all the animation they had to revolve around earthbending.
Yes.
It is such a it's actually fun to watch it. Like I cannot even see the characters and just see like the shit that they can do with earthbending. Because I remember. I think what shows us off, like, probably the best, even though it's just slabs of rock, is when he fights King Boomy. Because the way they make it work, like, it goes from, like, a big slab to the point where he lifts the entire balcony above his head. And early on, it shows, like, just how crazy they can go with it. And that was, like, the first season?
Yeah, that was, like,
not even 10 episodes in?
Yeah, it was episode 5 or so.
Yeah, it was not when they were actually in the Earth Kingdom proper.
Yeah. It's like you're seeing just like the way things flow around, the way things like just get torn up. So I think earthbending. I think I'm gonna have to agree with Meg. I think earthbending is my favorite looking because you see like the machinations of how things move. Like you see these big chunks of rock, or like these little like rock shards shooting at stuff, or like the walls being torn apart, the ground being torn apart. Like there's just things moving in so many distinct, incredible shapes that come out of stuff to like show how things are being torn apart. I don't know. the way they think. No two drawings are alike, and I just really commend that for whoever did the effects animation, especially for the earthbending. So,
the earthbending has probably the greatest effect on their surroundings, and it has the most permanent effect.
Exactly.
But even with stuff like, air and fire, a common complaint about just effects in general is, you see too much of it and it gets boring, and you're basically asking yourself, as somebody who's going to work on something like this, how many different ways can I draw an explosion?
Yes.
Well, the answer is don't. Make it interesting. Yeah. Do interesting things with the effect that's happening, so that even stuff like little, puffs of flame or a blast of air or a stream of water flying around or a rock flying someplace looks interesting and does something cool, and also advances the scene and the scenario that's playing out.
And also just have, unique effects to different characters, too. I love that Zuko uses normal fire, but then you have Azula with, this crazy blue fire that's, seems like it's, almost better than his, and it's just,
She got the Yori flame.
Yeah, she got the fucking... It's sick.
Just to signify how much more powerful she is.
Yes. And how much she stands on her own, where she has, I have my own fire. So it's
Also, I know you can't be talking about the animation until you mention Toph.
Yes.
The episode she's... Yeah, man. That is probably the best example of what you're trying to talk about right now. Not just so much in the fact that they use the abilities in a different way, and it allows the animators to really take advantage of, like you said, not drawing an explosion 500 times, but in the episode where Toph's shown off in, all the Earthbenders decide to use their powers initially to create a huge dust storm with just a bunch of fucking rocks.
Yeah.
And then what happens is probably the coolest shit that happens in the show, where she can feel them touch on the ground, and it shows that crazy animation where the waves travel up her body and then through the floor.
It's like a sonar.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Like a sonar effect, yeah. Who would have I can understand thinking about that, but to animate it in that specific way so that everyone gets it immediately is... I really I want to shake the hand of whoever did that shit, because that's genius.
Seriously.
Everything that happened in that arena was great. The episode where she's introduced, and you have the kind of a pro wrestling homage going on, down to the Boulder.
Yeah, who's just The Rock. Really blatantly.
The Rock / Randy Savage. It's it's incredible. That whole episode was great, though. I love that episode.
It's fantastic, and also just not only just cool action, but just also really fun slapstick. Just people getting knocked around in goofy ways. Aang does the silly thing where he fights Toph for the first time. He just immediately blows her off the stage, and she's not expecting it because he thinks it's an Earthbender, and she's like, what the fuck, and she falls over. It's so just goofy and just take itself seriously. So commend the animators and the storyboarders and everybody in charge. They did a fantastic job. So.
We're not even really scratching the surface.
Not even.
We've been talking about this for a minute, and we're barely scratching the surface of all the awesome shit that happens.
I want to interject real quick, and it's one thing that I was hoping you guys would mention, but didn't, and I wish I had looked it up, because it's one part about this show I think people, I don't want to say neglect, but maybe they don't think about so much, is the soundtrack.
Oh, actually,
yeah,
I got notes for that.
The soundtrack is killer.
Yeah, sorry, I want to get into that too. Go for it.
The main theme of that show, once you hear it as a kid, it's stuck in your head.
It's extremely catchy.
And all the music just... Again, this was on Nickelodeon, and some of the music that they use in this is shit you don't even hear now, and it doesn't feel like movie music. That's one thing that I hate hearing in any show ever, is that fucking dial orchestra movie music.
Yeah, that generic Hans Zimmerman sound.
Dun, 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 that shit. It's got it feels like they got someone who is I want to say more versed in the culture of it was based in China, was the whole sort of deal, more of those kinds of instruments that they use. It was very percussion heavy. It had this strange, I don't know what it's called. I think it may be called a biwa lute, but I could be wrong. It plays when
they got those instruments. They got a biwa lute, they got a zazang, a pipa, a duduk, lots.
There you go. The song that plays whenever Zuko visits Iroh in the little prison. That one still kind of haunts me to this day. And the fact that they would just they went the extra mile in a way that they didn't really even need to. You could have probably had this show have no music at all and it'd still be as good. But the fact that they went the extra mile to make it seem even more authentic with just the choices of instruments that they used, the types of music that they used, like even like when the situation's all goofy, like they even have a dedicated theme to Momo that plays every once in a while.
So the music of the show was done by Jeremy Zuckerman and Benjamin Wynn. And the two of them are basically sound designers, but they also do compose music. So they kind of treat it as like one and the same. So that's one notice a lot about the show is that a lot of percussion will be used for like sound effects or to punctuate certain actions. So the soundtrack is kind of always there and always kind of involved. One thing they really wanted to emphasize is that there's like an adaptive soundtrack going on that would change, depending on the mood. So you have Aang's theme, and like use as an example, and it'll be playing when just doing Aang things. But then for like a certain sadder moment, like let's say Aang is sad, they'll introduce different instruments into the main melody to fit that mood. And then when Aang is like angry, they'll change it up too. And so it's like every character has like several different variations of their own theme. The show has its own variations of their own theme. So I think people don't actually point out, and they point out in an interview, is that the main theme is two parts, and you hear the first part in the main theme, obviously in the intro, and then you hear the other part later on when Aang goes Avatar state. So
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, so there's a lot to the show's soundtrack, and the fact that they approach it in such a unique way, where you're having this kind of adaptive nature, and they have so many different instruments, and they're doing it all live, and also they treat it as if it's like part of the sound foley, the soundscape itself. It just feels so natural, and like you don't think about it, but when you do, it's like, oh wow, there's so much going on here. It's such a rich soundtrack. So,
I might be about to make an ass of myself here, but I've heard this referred to before in the context of Jackie Chan films, and how a lot of his inspiration came from, I believe, Chinese opera.
Yes.
I would not be surprised to see that they're taking a lot of cues from that as well, like Chinese opera, the incorporation of music, action beats, choreography, all into one package. And you say, you could remove the music and it would be just as good. I actually kind of disagree with that.
Wait, who said that?
Mang.
Oh, I said that.
Oh.
Yeah. I think that the music is kind of integral to it. It elevates it so much more. Like, it would still be good. It wouldn't be bad without it. But it is so much more than just things happening on a screen once you incorporate that element into it. And it's not used cheaply either. There's no, not just in the sense of there's no, like, canned music, so to speak. I mean, there's themes that get used and stuff like that, but
yeah, for sure.
It's not used to generate, like, needless melodrama or, tonally inappropriate ways. It's extremely thoughtful, and it's integrated into it very tightly, to the point where it can actually be kind of annoying if you're looking for a specific song. Because, I mean, there is a soundtrack attached to this show, but there are things that you're going to hear only once or twice.
Yeah.
In fact, there's one that I was trying to find a while back that I could not find for the life of me. And it's a song that gets used maybe 3 times. The first 2 times that I heard it that I could recall, both involve Zuko as the Blue Spirit. Especially when they're escaping the prison. And then it comes up again, I think, when he's fighting Azula toward the end.
Is it that song that has like a lot of like tinny percussion in it?
Yes.
I love that one.
I couldn't find it! And it's different each time!
Yeah, they put a lot of thought into it. Yeah, I think the thing that makes it, that I love about the soundtrack so much is that it feels like a saga in the way, like, you think of like Star Wars music, that makes it feel like this grandiose opera, like you said, like a Chinese opera. Like this story is happening, everything's unfolding. So yeah,
the music is its own character.
Yeah, it really adds a lot to it. It makes it
That's
feel
the
like
best way to put it.
Yeah, it's so grandiose and what's going on.
It's like the narrator almost,
Yeah, it's like this is what's going on now. It's like this is great. So, all right. Well, here's one like closing thing, I guess, because it's so weird. I know we've like barely scratched the surface, but there's so much. We can go. Honestly, we can talk about the show for like hours.
We can talk about this all day. Honestly,
we could be here next week.
Yeah,
Fuck
it's
that.
a brilliant show. But let's in the interest of fairness. Well, what's something we don't like about the show? How about you, Phil?
If there's one thing about the show, well, I would actually say there are 2 things that kind of stood out to me, and one that I'm completely understanding of, and one that I'm not too hard, not too bent out of shape with. I understand why a lot of characters, especially incidentals, had kind of like a color scheme going on that made it feel sort of like everybody's wearing a uniform. There's a lot of color coding that happens, but that's just like a personal nitpick, and it's so insignificant that it's really not a huge deal. It's just that, for me, I like design. And for the most part, I actually like how their outfits and stuff are put together, even for their incidentals.
Mm.
That just kind of stood out to me as kind of odd, but I get it. The other thing, too, is, you mentioned there are not really any Deus Ex Machina necessarily. The way that coincidence was used sometimes was kind of odd. Kind of like, oh, this is happening. This character's just here, I guess. But there again, coincidences get the characters into trouble far more often than they get them out of trouble.
And usually they'll use coincidences for the sake of humor. Like the episode with The Great Divide, where he resolves it because he knows something about a story. And he kind of makes it up, but you know what I mean? But
he makes it up, but that's not really what I'm talking about. But more like one of the more bigger coincidences I noticed was
well, what I meant was like it's a coincidence that he knew the two guys that had the argument.
No, he was making that up.
I thought the lie was that he knew them, but the lie of what happened was like everything else.
Maybe I actually forget if he made the entire thing up, but I think that he was saying that because he's so old that he did. And he's just BSing the whole time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was under the impression he just made the whole thing up.
Okay, no.
Well, things like when Toph and Iroh just happen to cross paths.
Yeah.
In that one episode where she's like run off, and then Zuko's run off, so Iroh's just kind of wandering around. They bump into each other in the woods.
Yeah.
It's like little things like that, but it's not terribly annoying. And I'm like, okay, things like this have to happen because the plot needs to move.
Mm.
Yeah.
And not all coincidences are completely unbelievable, of course. I actually think that an excessive aversion to coincidence can hurt a story a lot.
Yeah, because things happen.
Because so much of life is just coincidence.
Yeah.
But I never felt like things were getting too contrived. There were contrivances, they were relatively minor. I actually don't have a whole lot whole lot of negative points to make about this. I mean, of course, it's not perfect, nothing is, but it deserves to be on the pedestal that it occupies.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about you, man?
So, really my only issue with this show, and I can summarize it up in just one word, Ozai.
Okay.
I say just Ozai because Ozai kind of doesn't really exist as an antagonist, but kind of what Fillmore said, it's kind of one of those things where it's more of a nitpick than like a big problem. Because even though Ozai, like, he's the big main bad guy and we rarely ever see him, he's not really the villain of the show. And you could argue that, well, he is because he's the leader of the Fire Nation, but I always thought that the Fire Nation, less the nation itself and more of the threat of it, was the villain of the show. Because it had its stink everywhere, all over the world. And because of the show's structure, it was fine not having like a big main villain to fight every single time. Because the show kind of followed like, it wasn't like a completely, last episode this, next episode based on last episode, that kind of structure. It was just like a series kind of stories that follow the timeline. And it had continuity too, but it was a series of stories. It felt like more than just like a step-by-step sort of thing. And that's fine, and I can argue. But my only thing with Ozai was like, everyone who preceded him had a little bit more going for them, I thought. Even if they weren't necessarily, great, because what's his name? Admiral Zhao. I didn't really get him the first time I watched it, but he was like intimidating. But one thing that I liked around the second time we watched it was this dude got totally bodied by teenagers pretty much every single time he showed up on screen.
Yeah, he has a bruised ego about it.
And he has like such a huge bruised ego about it. And the episode where Aang gets him to burn his own ship up is some funny shit.
Yeah.
And then we lose him, and then in his place we get Azula, who I never liked, but watching it again, I realized that's how you're supposed to feel.
Yeah, you're not really meant to like her. She's supposed
as
to
a
be
kid, I was like, I can't stand her. She gets her way all the time. She's perfect. She's never, ever fazed by anything. But then watching this again, I was like, oh yeah, no, you're supposed to hate her. You're supposed to feel how fucking Zuko does.
Exactly.
This perfect-ass bitch going up in here with her blue-ass fire. There's even an episode where she gets thrown out of a what's it called? What are those things called? Like a gondola? She gets thrown out of one of those onto like a sheer cliff face, and she manages to catch herself even there, and even Zuko's just like, of course she makes it. And then Ozai is just Ozai. And it's kind of a shame, because we got such cool characters, I say cool, such, let's say, an impactful villain like Azula, who just manages to be everywhere at the worst possible moment. And then Ozai's just kind of sitting in his chair, just eating chips until like the sun goes out. Like, yeah, all right, well, I'll let you guys take care of it, I guess. And like I said, it's more of a minor nitpick than anything because the show didn't need necessarily a big final boss. It had one, but I kind of hate making it like a huge cliche. But it really was more about the journey than the destination at the end of the day. So, like outside of like Ozai, I'm trying to think anything else that bothered me about the show, and I really can't think of anything outside of like maybe the last season felt a little scrunched up, especially after Zuko joined. It felt like the show was just like, all right, let's go.
Yeah.
It got
Like
a
they
little
had to get,
compressed.
like even Toph points it out whenever everyone has like their big adventure with Zuko. Even Toph is just like, everyone gets to have a life-changing adventure with Zuko. Now it's my turn. And that had to be they had to have known, so I'm fine with it. Again, like it's what Fillmore said. He pointed out best. There's a reason this show is held up in such a high regard, and there's a reason people consider it to be pretty much flawless because it's not a perfect show, but if I had to call a show perfect, I'd probably name this one.
Even when it stumbles, it catches itself.
Exactly. What I would say about Ozai is that, like, I guess I mostly agree with you, but and this I can overlook it because I don't think Ozai is necessarily meant to be the bad guy in the context of the show. I mean, obviously he's the villain, but what I think the general idea is that they're combating imbalance, and Ozai is just a representation of that. I think that's what they're saying. The reason why the Fire Nation's influence is so widespread is because it's just saying that things are wrong. Things are not supposed to be this way. There's imbalance in the world. Every character in the show always kind of points to the fact that there are 4 elements, so why is one so powerful? That's bullshit. Let's set things right. So I'm okay with Ozai being not too well characterized because I think that's not really the point. I think Ozai is more representation rather than a character.
Yeah.
Ozai is much more of an idea. He's more of an icon.
Yes.
As opposed to a character. And I mean, you could say, well, it's a bit of a missed opportunity that does not have much of a character, and what little character that he has is just pure jerk.
Yeah, he's just an asshole.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, we even get to know more about, like, fucking Sozin, and then the last avatar before Aang, who's Roku, who's also from the Fire Nation, really cool dude.
Yeah.
They get more characterization than he does, but it's just the fact that he is basically the personification of this horrible, horrible conflict and all the chaos that's happening in their world at that point in time. To the point where it's almost not even about the Fire Nation itself. It's just about, like you said, the imbalance. The, unchecked greed and ambition and aggression and arrogance that he embodies. And every time he shows up, he's putting that on full display. Yeah,
it's just a constant reminder of, like, this is what we're fighting against. Let's do something about it.
This guy is evil, and we are fighting evil.
So,
yeah.
Sorry.
No, yeah, it's like I was about to say is because like I was trying to like point that out when I tried to say it, but you said it like to the best, like better than I could when I was saying like, oh, it's more about like the Fire Nation as an ideal and how people see it. But yeah, it's like you said, it's like an imbalance because like you said, like why is only one element better than the rest when they're all pretty equally, important. So I think that's kind of something I didn't get when I first watched it, but especially I got it when you pointed it out, and I got it especially more when I watched Korra, where the whole entire concept of Avatar as a show and as a series is about combating imbalance.
Yes.
So I think you're right when you say that Ozai was more of a interpretation of the imbalance in the world versus like him being an actual like standardized villain, and I can accept that.
Right.
And the irony of it was, as we learn, the only reason that they came out on top was because they got lucky. That's literally it. A comet comes along, makes the Firebenders very, very powerful anytime that it appears, and they take advantage of that opportunity to launch their attack on the world, fuck everything up, and that brings us to the 100-Year War. They got lucky. There's nothing about them that's inherently better.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it that way.
So, my complaints about the show are probably like, they're also pretty damn minor. There's one general complaint everybody has is the ending, where like they have this kind of they have a bit of the ass pull of the lion turtle, and people kind of vary on how much it affects the show. It's kind of a bit of a bummer, but I don't think it doesn't impact my enjoyment too much. I still think the ending is really fun. I still think the show is great. But my more personal complaint is it's a show all about Eastern influence and mythology and stuff, and that's cool. But I can't help but feel like the anime style doesn't quite represent that in a way where it's like I get why they did it because it was big at the time. Anime is really big in the year 2005. You have Teen Titans doing it, another really popular show, action show that has like this kind of anime style. I get it, and I don't think it looks bad at all. I think they make it work really well, but it is kind of a bummer that you have this show that's like, hey, we're taking bits from all of Asia, but then you have something that's so decidedly Japanese as the main style. And I would have liked to see something. I don't know what it would be, to be honest, but I would have liked to see something more like in between everything, like more of a unified style. So that's just my mind. That's my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I feel kind of mixed on that.
Mm-hmm.
I do agree that something that had been more, let's call it unique would have been better. But I still feel like, even though it's like anime style, that the style this show has is still very unique. I don't really think anything else like even looks like it. Like, I remember when we were watching it, they're like, even the one-offs have some pretty good designs, like Sokka's Swordmaster teacher, to the point where I was just like, are these based off of like real people? Not necessarily because of how realistic they look, but a lot of the designs feel like they could just be real people, and they take a lot of what's it called, racial cues from a lot of characters. I remember I pointed this out, was like, even though it's like anime style, like Sokka and Katara look. They look like they would be some kind of like Inuit sort of kind of person.
For sure.
Like, so I feel kind of what you mean. It's like, yeah, for a show that looks as good as it does, and for a show that does what it does, it'd be nice if it had like an art style that make it stick out even more. But I still feel like it suffices just fine. They did a great job of what they had.
For sure. So, anything else?
I was actually trying to look something up real fast because I would like to think that I've read this before, but don't quote me on this. I think that a lot of the incidentals and characters in general were actually inspired kind of by people watching. But I don't have an exact source on that, and that's what I was actually trying to grab just real fast. Because it really does feel like that. It looks like they were looking at, just here's people passing by, here's my sketchbook, I'm just going to draw what I see, which goes all the way back to the conception of Aang being a kid version of an old man that somebody just saw. And I like that they paid so much attention to making people from every region kind of look distinct without also kind of pigeonholing them into a real-world race, so to speak.
Yeah, it's still kind of fantasy-ish, but they still like, okay, that guy's kind of Chinese, that guy's kind of Inuit. You can sort of tell.
Yeah, it's like, the skin tone, the facial features, everything varies a ton. Yeah. So people feel like they're from like, different parts of the world, and that's a level of detail that the show's successor could not quite commit to.
Oh boy.
Only the Avatar can master all 4 elements and bring balance to the world.
I guess without further ado, let's just say Avatar. If you've never seen Avatar: Last Airbender, and honestly, I don't know why you watch so much of this without, fucking go watch it. It's a fucking excellent
watch
show.
Watch this fucking show.
It has a high. People talk about it so highly for a reason. It's not overhyped or anything like that. It's a great show. It's worth your time. It's 3 seasons long. It's 60 episodes of your fucking life. You could be fucking eating dirt, or you could be watching Avatar. It's up to you.
And also, don't let the American anime style that they're talking about scare you.
No.
I mean, to be fair, I mean, I actually don't know what alternatives they would have.
I don't either.
And that was kind of like what the people that were animating that were kind of specializing in.
Yeah.
So to speak. So they made it work really well, and it becomes even more of its own thing as time goes on.
For sure. They work in the Western elements into the Eastern style pretty well. I'm not even saying it's a bad thing at all.
Yeah,
I'm just saying it's just a personal preference. I would have liked to see something a little more unique, but they make it work. They own it, and so I can't complain about that. So, yeah. Avatar Last Airbender, everybody. So, here's where we talk about a show that, it's Avatar in name only.
Wow. Wow.
Well, This is The Legend of Korra, the sequel series to Avatar, The Last Airbender, that premiered 4 years later. And it's same creators at the helm. So they had a much smaller team on this one. That's a little bit. There's produced episodes. This kind of came out pretty quick. So the show's got a weird history. It came out. It was pitched. It was shown off in 2011. People were like, "Oh shit, new Avatar." It was called Avatar: Last Airbender, The Legend of Korra, and then eventually the title was shortened down to just The Legend of Korra to avoid make it less of a mouthful, probably to avoid confusion with the movie and stuff like that. So the Avatar movie that came a little after the original Airbender series completed. So
when did Shyamalan's Avatar movie happen in
2010.
relation to this?
So
wow.
So yeah, it's a little before it. So Korra is 4 seasons long, a bit, but has less episodes. Every season of the original show, Last Airbender, was 20 episodes, and three seasons, so 60 episodes. This one is about 12 to 14 per the 4 seasons, so we're about around 50 episodes or so. And the first 2 seasons aired on TV, and then somewhere in the middle of the 3rd season they moved it to online due to declining ratings. When the show came out, it actually had a pretty strong showing. It had it was pretty comparable to The Last Airbender. You have to realize after Last Airbender ended, that was like a huge success still. Like the merch and the books and the movie, like it did. Even the movie, which is a piece of crap, was financially successful. So you have Nickelodeon kept re-airing Avatar. They kept showing it every day. They showed it on their sister network, Nicktoons. They'd find new ways to air it. They have to have hey, here's the trivia block where we air Avatar episodes where we'd have trivia on it. That show was huge for Nickelodeon, so of course naturally it came a time it was like, what if we had a sequel, a continuation of some sort with a new Avatar in a new area with new years later, new powers and stuff. So let's see how we can examine that. And everybody in the world was like, yeah, that sounds great. I'd love a new Avatar. That show was great. And you had the same creators back on board. So we're like, okay, let's see how well this can go. And things quickly went south. So
what could possibly go wrong? Famous last words. Even I fucked that up. The failure is seeping into all of us.
Went wrong. Then got worse.
Yes.
Then got okay, and then it got worse again.
So the original show was animated by, I don't want to say DK Media was their name, and they worked DR Movie. Sorry, DR Movie was a Korean studio. They worked on lots of action, superhero shows, like the Batman and stuff like that. So they kind of had experience with action shows. Studio Mir worked on Korra, and they're best known for stuff on the Boondocks. This show also has a weird production history with the animation. Most of the show is done by Studio Mir, except for the first half of season 2, which is done by Studio Pierrot, which is in Japan. And Pierrot is kind of known to be... Pierrot's worked on stuff like Naruto and Polar Bear Cafe, and they're considered to be a bit lesser quality in a Studio Mir. So season 2, it kind of looks a little rough around the edges. The reason why Studio Mir didn't work on the first half of season 2 is because they were being contracted to work on the Boondocks, which they felt was a little bit easier to work on. But then they came back on because they felt Perot's work was so shoddy that it would make them look bad in relation. So they had to come back on and work and finish up the rest of the series. So yeah. So one last little thing. Their first season was written almost entirely by the creators of the show. It was the 2 of them came back, Reich, and then they also had another small team of writers. So Avatar, the original series, Airbender, has around 9 or so directors and almost 20 writers that kind of alternated in and out, and they kind of brought their own flavor, and they worked with each other a lot to work on things. The main director was Giancarlo Volpe, who worked on great shows like Gargoyles and Spectacular Spider-Man. And then you have Aaron Ahaz, who's a great writer himself. He's worked on Mission Hill, and he was kind of the main writer. So these two kind of brought the show together. So they were not on Korra. Korra had a different team of writers, most of which worked on the original series too, but they weren't quite as prolific as Aaron Ahaz. So you have Tim Hedrick, who wrote 48 episodes of the original, Katie Matilla, who wrote just 3 episodes of Korra, and Breik, the 2 of them wrote most of Korra, and they also had a far smaller team of directors, a far smaller team of writers, a far smaller animation staff, and far shorter deadlines, because the deadlines were so short that they were working on season 4 when season 2 wasn't even done yet. So
wow.
Yeah, we mentioned the original pitch for The Last Airbender happened in several years before the show was even, being put to pencil.
Yes.
And this show was just rammed out just like that. Lightning fast. Practically as soon as the ink had dried and the toner had set in on their pitch at Nickelodeon, they were getting started on it. And that explains more, I think, than anything else.
So
all the many, many problems and deficiencies that this show has, so much of it can be summed up in one word, and that is underbaked.
So, Fillmore, you kind of already gave your opinion a little bit, so... So, I guess, what is Avatar? What is Legend of Korra? Legend of Korra is a sequel series about Korra, the next Avatar after Aang, 70 years later.
And you've got to deal with it.
And you gotta deal with it. We're in a new place. The original show is about this kind of globe-trotting adventure. Now we're kind of in one place that's called Republic City. And it's sort of like this New York, Chicago style, kind of a little bit of Hong Kong in there. But mostly New York. Not much. Like a little, like a pinch of nutmeg.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But yeah, we're in this kind of New York style place. It's supposed to be like a hub for all the benders to live in, all the different nations to live in. Aang had children. He has his son Tenzin, who was played by J.K. Simmons, famous actor, and his kids, who are three kids and four because it's a baby. So they have this new set of Airbenders. So their nation's kind of coming back after being genocided in the original series. So that's kind of setting up the stage. Korra's got to head to Republic City to learn how to be an Airbender and learn how to do many different things. And you introduce a new set of characters, new cast, new enemies, and so on. The thing about this show is that the original show is more episodic, even though there's still like a more overarching plot, but they would have just kind of random adventures within the context of the story. This is more, every season is a constantly moving kind of like serialized plot that wraps up in each season. So the first season was actually supposed to be it. It was supposed to be just to be a miniseries, but I guess Nick was confident in it, so they approved 3 more seasons. Horribly.
What misplaced confidence.
Yes, so each season kind of tells its own little story, and they sort of overlap with each other, but they're mostly like kind of its own thing, and I guess that's sort of it. So, Film, we're getting into it. What do you think of The Legend of Korra?
Well, before we get too far into that, I was just wanting to say 2 things. First of all, let's not gloss over, once again, the kind of themes that the first show was getting into in the subject matter that it was kind of touching on.
Before we get too far, actually, before I get far and before you get far, let me say this: we want to talk about Korra, but we were like, how are we going to talk about it? Because everybody's talked about the plot to death, right?
Yeah, and that's what I was about to get to. Like, I'm not going to get too far into the plot of Korra because 1, it's garbage, and 2, everybody knows it's garbage and why it's garbage. But the thing I did want to touch on, like, let's not ignore the fact that the original show was getting into really heavy stuff right off the bat, including...
Oh, thank God. I'm glad you're saying it. The show starts with absolutely 0 stakes, and I can't stand that.
Yeah, Korra has nothing like that, whereas with the first show, right off the bat, we're learning about, like, the actual fucking genocide of the Airbenders. What the fuck? You know?
Something that was pointed out to us when we were watching is that the intros of both shows illustrate perfectly what's the difference, the disparity between them. The original show was like, here's the Avatar, master of all elements, shit was fine, Federation attacked, and now there's this crisis happening. The Avatar needs to come and learn all 4 elements to defeat them. Korra is, here's the Avatar, they have to learn all the 4 elements. Okay. And then the show.
It's just a dictionary definition of what the Avatar is.
Yes.
It's like they're reading the Wikipedia page.
Exactly. This show is so devoid of stakes or anything interesting.
Or any kind of like heavy themes in general. It tries to pretend like it's more mature, which is one of its biggest problems in terms of the writing, which we're not going to focus too much on that. But the first show was actually mature. And it actually had heavy themes. And it did it perfectly. In a show that was ostensibly aimed at children. And then the other thing, too, is the continuity model. The first show used the larger plot of them advancing toward their confrontation with Ozai and ending the 100-Year War as a framing device, and then smaller adventures happened within that. Whereas this show has hard continuity. every episode leads into the next within the season, and the ends of the seasons, the ending of one, will link into the beginning of the next in some fashion. And that might seem good on paper, but it actually really kind of screwed things up. It made the storytelling way less interesting, and it also obliged the characters to remain in one location, whereas they had much greater freedom to move from set piece to set piece in the original show. So instead of going around the world, we couldn't go around the world if we wanted to, and we barely do in this one. We're stuck in this boring-ass city.
Korra couldn't go down the block in some episodes, dude.
Yeah, it's like you're stuck here in fucking the New York or whatever in Vegas. Yeah, it's not even... It tries to be New York, but it even fails at that. And then we're stuck in kind of Hong Kong for a little while, but then we go back to New York.
So, the thing about the show is that the original Last Airbender is obviously, it's very Asian-inspired. And Korra still maintains parts of that, but there's definitely more of a leaking of, like, we're having a more Western influence, more like an American side to it.
I'd say more than just a leak.
More than just a leak. More like a flood. Like, your basement's flooded and like all your stuff is ruined. Like, hey, grandma's knickknacks, they're all flooded out.
The septic tank is backing up into your house.
Yeah.
I just want to interject. You're about to get into that, so I'll let you go on. But yeah, I want to speak a couple of words about that when it comes up, but go on.
Okay.
Yeah, there's... Now the visuals are more leaning towards like this kind of 1920s, like, roaring 20s. You have like a lot of jazz now. That's kind of what the soundtrack is. At least early on. At least early on, they kind of drop it as it keeps going. But you have like cars now. You have these things that are like, you have radios. You have all these like okay, yeah, I get it. Americana, 1920s sort of thing. We're moving away from the Asian thing a lot. There's still like Asian aspects to it. You still have like Chinese writing. You still have like little pagodas on top of skyscrapers, which Fenimore likes to call Asian hats, which is a perfect name for them.
Yeah. Do you mind if I just use that as a jumping off point? Because that's the part where this show hurts me the most, other than its writing. The design in Korra is absolutely fucking terrible. And when I say it's terrible, I don't mean that it's like, oh, this is just aesthetically bad. There are things that are aesthetically worse, actually. The problem is that it is so goddamn lazy. Like, yeah. And when I say underbaked, there's nowhere that shows more than in the design of the environments and objects and vehicles and things that they interact with in their world. Because it really is like they just said, okay, find some reference images of like the 20s in a big city, like New York or whatever. Fine, okay, put a pagoda on it. Okay, it's Asian now. They put the Asian hat on it. In order to make the cars look like they might have come from the world that we saw in Last Airbender, they take a actual fucking Model T, almost like a perfect recreation of it, and put a pagoda roof on it for some reason. It's like every single thing that they have in this show, they just took a real-world object or a real-world place and put a fucking pagoda on it. And it's so bad. Like, in the original show, as you're traveling around the world, because that's something that we do with this adventure, we have all these different locations that are so interesting to look at. You have, just to give two great examples from the Earth Kingdom alone, you have Ba Sing Se, which is a giant walled city, which we actually go back to in Korra, and it's probably the most interesting place they visit, just by virtue of it not being New York. And then we have Omashu, which is like this big ziggurat pyramid type thing that's like laced with all these different roads and full channels they send these cart things through. It's really fascinating, like the way that city works. Again, weaving in the practical elements of bending into their world. We have nothing like that in Korra. It's just, here's New York, put a pagoda on it. And
no, see, we had the Metal City, which was a place so bland I don't even think I could give it a description.
The only reason it's made of metal is so they didn't have to texture the models of the city.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. Holy shit. But no, like you were saying, pagoda hats.
They put an Asian hat on a whole bunch of shit that's just taken from the real world. And I'm thinking to myself, is this really the best you could do? Like, when I'm thinking of how the Avatar world would advance 70 some odd years into the future and come into what's roughly the early 20th century, I'm thinking of how they would have integrated what they knew and what they did back then into the, this new time period that they're in. And yeah, I love Art Deco as much as the next guy, and I really do, actually. But couldn't you have done something more creative, and couldn't you have thought a little bit more about how they might actually build a city like this, and maybe use the old show as a point of reference? One of the biggest missed opportunities, I think, in just introducing Republic City is failing to show really anything in that city being made. Like, how do these people do their jobs? The most that we get to see that is the stupid way they generate electricity.
Jesus.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you'll have something to say about that, so I'm not going to ruin that for you, Mang. Because I know that you had things to say about that.
Let's toss over to Mang, then.
Yeah. Please, enlighten us.
Okay. So, there's a lot of things I could talk about, but let's just start with the world, because I feel like that's maybe the safest place to start so we don't get completely out of control when we're talking about this show. So, kind of like what Fillmore said, in stark contrast to The Last Airbender, in Korra, there's not a whole lot of... Wow, that was one fuck of a sentence. There isn't a lot of movement going along with the characters in this. I don't mean like movement like necessarily. Like they go to different parts of the city, and so what? Sometimes if they want to, but it's more like if you remember the Ba Sing Se episodes where it took place in the city and they had adventures in there.
Yeah.
The whole city felt like like a city, a place where you could do a whole bunch of shit in. That's another fuck of a sentence.
A place people live there.
Yeah, it feels like a place someone could live. Republic City doesn't feel like a place to live. It feels like a place where a plot happens. Mm-hmm. If that makes any sense.
It does.
Yeah, it's
plot really happens there, but I never get the feeling that anyone really lives there. And I know we said we went too much on the plot, but I'll get into that when I'm talking about like the city thing. Because in the very first episode, or maybe it's the second episode, they bring on the villain Amon, who's supposed to be like an anti-Bender sort of character. And he's supposed to be like this revolutionary sort of kind of guy, this sort of dude that has a cult of personality around him. At least I think that's what they tried to get at. But it doesn't quite work. Because in the episode where, they're spreading propaganda about like his message, there's like maybe like a crowd of like 7 people around this guy, and then later it goes to one of his meetings and it's like half the city is there. So I mean it gets it gets really difficult to put like your thumb on the pulse of like the entirety of Republic City, because it's a place where shit happens but no one actually lives there. Like well into the second season there's a fucking terrorist attack on one of the buildings, and it's like it's supposed to be like an important building. I don't remember, but you would think a terrorist attack in a city like that's populated by so many people would like cause a bunch of people to be scared as shit. But we never really see anything from the ground level. We never really see a whole lot of just Joe Schmoes or just incidentals in this. Kind of like how Avatar or Zuko would go to a village and they'd see people suffering underneath the Fire Nation's thumb. You don't really get a whole lot of that in Korra and Republic City. You don't really get an idea of what this place is like. Because, yeah, Korra gets there and she immediately has to deal with some thugs, but I guess that's their way of saying, oh, this is like a dirty sort of city where crime runs the place. But later on in the series, it seems like that's not really too much of a problem. You don't really see like a slum sector or like a high there is like a high profile sector of the city, but you don't really get that feeling of like, oh, Republic City is a nice place to live, or it's a rough place to live, or it's a place where there's a lot of public unrest. You never really get that. So it starts to be a very boring place to have a plot. Too bad they come here every other season, every other episode to do shit in. And when they do go to other places, and I will get into season 3, and it's easy to shit on Korra, but the more I think about season 3, the more good things I kind of have to say about it, and I'll get to around that to when it's time to. But just to sort of give you a little sneak preview of that, the reason why that particular season stuck out is because the cast went to a bunch of different places for a plot reason too. Not just because of some stupid bullshit like they do with Republic City. Why is anyone still here? Korra has to come here to learn airbending, but she doesn't learn airbending, so she goes back to learn air. I don't know. Yeah. I remember when I was watching this with you guys, I actually was getting really, really frustrated, and I couldn't figure out why. And I was like, oh, that's because this is so hard to follow. Which is another reason it has to kind of do with, like, not necessarily the plot, but just sort of the world. It gets kind of hard to follow what happens in this show because of that lack of interaction between the characters and the world they live in. Where Avatar: The Last Airbender felt more like a show where the world was built, and then characters that live in that world were made after, and we were told stories with those characters. Korra feels more like characters were made first, and then the world was built around them.
Mhm.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can write a story like that, and that'll work out just fine. But the trappings of having that kind of progression, I'm not saying this is how they made it, that's just the impression it gives me. And the reason it gives me that impression is because there's a whole lot of things that just beg the question of, like, fucking how? There's a lot of parts in this show where I had to go, fucking how? In Season 2, when Unalaq shows up and he takes over the entire
Southern.
He takes over Southern. Okay, he takes over the Southern Water Tribe. Fucking how?
We're not given a good indication of how he accomplished this.
Or like the scale of it.
Yeah.
Walk up there? Did nobody tell them that they were coming? This is the kind of thing that in Avatar, like, you might just say that, oh, that's a nitpick. Well, it's like, well, in Avatar, chances are they probably would have known something like that, and or if he didn't want to become a villain immediately, he wouldn't have done that. So there's that. There's Zahir killing the Earth Queen, and it's like, okay, but fucking how? And I get, like, because, like, yeah, he's a big bad guy, he's a real threat. Sure, I'm not necessarily having a problem with him killing her, but it's like, you're really telling me there was no contingency plan put in place for if this dickhead of a queen got assassinated. Y'all never thought about that. And I don't like to be that kind of person that likes to nitpick, like, little shit like this, but you have to at some point, because your suspension of disbelief gets just totally swept from under your feet when Unalaq's like, by the way, I'm going to make a giant portal so we can fast travel between the North and the South Pole. Yeah, okay. You just said that sentence. And I'm not even really, like, that's an abridged version of what he says, but
it's
he says
really
that.
what he does.
Yeah,
It's what he does. He says one sentence about it, and nobody says anything else about that up until the very end of the season. So you have to ask yourself, why is he here? And then you have to rewatch that, and you're like, oh yeah, that's why. So the world of Korra, I don't want to say it doesn't exist, but it feels fake. And I know you guys have touched upon the whole thing with the, like, it has, like, the Model T, the shitty CG Model T, and it has, like, all this stuff that, yeah, this came 70 years after Avatar, which, that's a huge pill to swallow, but I'm, like, okay, they figured out metal bending, okay, considering, you don't gotta smelt that shit anymore like you do for real, okay, sure, I can buy them making a car. But one thing that just gets hard to swallow is just how, even though it's like a huge bustling city, they don't really do anything with it. Even though it's like we go to this new kingdom, or not really a new kingdom, it's an old kingdom under new management. They do some fun stuff there, but it just feels like a lost opportunity at every single point. And then there's Season 4, which is just a fog. I don't even really remember where Season 4 takes place. Does it take place on a train, I think? I don't know. It's weird. We'll get into it, I'm sure. But I think the best way to describe this show, like, just in terms of, like, how the world is and just how the environments are set up, it's like a fucking mosaic painting, man. Like, yeah, that happened. Okay, moving on. Next piece, please. Ahmad, what are your thoughts?
Actually, I'm going to toss the film real quick.
Well, the thing that you're talking about is more... It is symptomatic of the show's bigger problems. The world that they inhabit is not even a stage. It's a prop. It's just there to exist. It is static, and it is there only to kind of to expedite whatever's happening, whatever's necessary. And of course, any setting is going to do that. But if you think about how better stories that have better world building are handled, the world itself is kind of a character. Not quite, as a person, but things happen to it. It has a state of play. There are consequences. There are different attributes, different layers. There are things that your characters will interact with, and things that interact with them. They don't feel like they're inhabiting some kind of vacuum, And the three words, I think, that are kind of the bookends to this whole thing is attention to detail. The lack of attention to detail in everything is one of the show's biggest problems, not only in terms of its writing, but in terms of its design, and in terms of, like, the set pieces that the characters visit, the places where they go. There's not a whole lot of thought put into stuff, and I think, again, that's probably just because there just wasn't time. And it takes time to develop a world.
I kind of want to just put, like, a little... I don't mean to cut you off or anything. I just want to put a little disclaimer here, just because in case if somebody hears this, and the show does change the world up around as it's season 3, where the spirits come back, and, the airbending come back. So,
the Pokemon show up.
The fucking Pokemon show up. Oh, man. But, the world, like you said, what you said is still right. It's less that the world doesn't change, but it's more that it's unsubstantial.
Yeah, it's neither impactful on the characters and the plot, nor is it interesting to look at. And just to put an even finer point on the whole thing about the cars, for example, it's not unbelievable they would have them. We see a fucking giant drill tank in the first show. We see giant, hot air balloon things flying around. All kinds of stuff going on. I can believe they would have cars. What bothers me is that those do not feel like something that their world would produce, nor does any of this architecture look like something their world would produce.
It feels far less researched and far less, like, put together and based on... Like, we're taking ideas from, like, real world. Obviously.
It's unnatural.
Yes. It feels, like, really, like, inorganic.
Grafted in. Mm-hmm. Like, in the first show, you would see... we gave several examples, actually. Everybody kind of has their own mode of transportation. The waterbenders can propel their boats with this stuff. The earthbenders have these weird little carts they move around using earthbending. The firebenders have machinery that they power themselves. Aang has his kite glider thing. There's nothing with even that level of kind of basic creativity and thought in Korra. Instead, we get generic airships that look like they just fell out of Final Fantasy or something. Because I guess we have to have that because steampunk has that. 1920s is steampunk, right? It's just like this brain-dead mode of thinking about everything. And that is probably what ticks me off the most.
What I would, pretty much. You guys both nailed that. It's like, God, this show.
It's a lot to take in.
The
failure, the magnitude of failure that we experienced watching this is like, it's like watching the London Bridge fall down every episode.
You're stuck in this location. You can tell even they get bored of because they spend less and less time in Republic City as the show goes on, mainly after season 2. Yeah. But
even the background artists got bored of it.
Yeah, okay, we're gonna get to that. It's you have these kind of really uninventive locales and locations. First, we have way fewer room because we're spending so much time in Republic City. And Republic City is such a baffling place to me because they obviously went for this more New York inspiration when the most obvious thing is like, why don't they go for like a more of a dirty Hong Kong kind of thing? You can have this really kind of claustrophobic, kind of more layered, structured city that would be interesting to look at, be populated with people, and you could have all these different benders bumping up against each other in this like kind of crammed place. And you have plenty of set pieces. You think of like old Hong Kong kung fu movies where they can take advantage of that and use it for fights and stuff. But no, the show never uses that to advantage. You're in this big urban environment, and the choreography doesn't ever use it. And speaking of the choreography, that's another thing. It took a giant. I guess we'll leap from there.
What choreography?
There is none in the show. Almost every single fight, without fail, is characters punching and kicking fireballs at each other, or water balls, or air balls, whatever the show wants to call it.
They just power swap the water and fire, I swear to God.
Yes, they look nearly identical. All the amazing effects work in the original series is completely absent here, outside of very few circumstances where it's there. You have all the earthbending are always square-shaped rocks that shoot out of the ground in the same particular way over and over again. It is very robotic, mechanical, very boring to watch, and by the time you've seen 2 episodes of the show, you've seen everything the show is capable of doing in terms of action. Characters do not make use of the environment, or if they do in very uninteresting, boring ways. The only characters who do this later on are the 4 villains of the 3rd season, the Red Lotus, and even then they're really woefully underbaked, despite having such unique powers, most of which are just based on characters from the original series anyway. So
I'd argue that season 4 has 1 or 2 fights that take place that are noteworthy for being kind of interesting because of the way that they use their surroundings.
Yeah.
But that's like at the end of the show, and it only happens once or twice.
Yes. And it's even then there's such small moments that I consider it basically underwhelming anyway. It's such a strange thing to see this first show get so right. And I would point that what Fillmore said is that it does feel like a productive thing of them rushing things out so much that it had less time to think about it. Like, that would explain a lot. The other thing is that not only do you have weaker choreography and weaker special effects and stuff, you also have weaker character design. The same character designer worked on this and then worked on Korra, as did Airbender. Joaquin Dos Santos, I think is his name. Let me look. Yeah, Joaquin Dos Santos, who also works on the current Voltron show that's on Netflix. This show, the original series, even despite its kind of anime kind of leaning, and anime has a reputation for being kind of same-facey and stuff like that, it didn't really have that problem. A lot of characters are really distinct. Even characters that are like, a similar age group to each other, they don't look like each other. They have different heights, they have different kind of faces, different face features, different outfits, different shapes in general. And that's that kind of Western sensibility is coming to like a more Eastern style. So everybody feels super distinct in that show, at least for the most part. You look over at Korra, and everyone's kind of around the same age again. You have, instead of being young kids, they're more like, young adults to actual adults as the show progresses. And every girl looks nearly identical in the show. They have the same kind of build, same sort of face. They're all just kind of Korra. And then on the other side, you have only 2 types of guys. You have shovel chin face guy.
Shovel face.
That's Tenzin, his brother. You can argue his brother could be similar to it, but all the adult males in the show look nearly identical to each other. They have the same sort of build, same sort of head, like general face structure. And then the other guy is like, I guess, pointy chin anime dude, like Mako is the other guy they have. Yeah. I guess the only somewhat distinct character is Bolin, even though he's kind of like a mixture between the two of those.
I'd say Zahir kind of sticks out, but maybe for different reasons.
For a little different reasons. He still kind of has a square jaw, but he's still a little different, to be fair.
And then you have Ed Wood, who sticks out by virtue of just everything on him being much more unique.
Yes, he's one of the few unique designs in the entire show. Before, like, he could have fit in just fine in the original show.
Yeah, Varric.
Are we going to talk about... No, we're not going to talk about the characers, but I'll get
yet.
to him when we get to.
His design is
I got something to say about him.
Yeah. So, you have this really blander visual design for all the characters, all the world, and just everything about it just feels so just ununique and unspecial. And then you get into the sort of philosophy of the show. The show delves into more... People compare Korra to more of the Star Wars prequels, not only in terms of quality, but also in terms of subject matter, where you're having this more kind of political leaning to it, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Having more political thriller, especially if something's supposed to be more modern anyway.
And confined to one location.
Exactly. So it's like, okay, we're in a city, lots of people. It's a perfect place to have, like, hey, let's deal with the idea of politics, how it affects this world and stuff. Fine.
Or how their society has problems that they're going to address in some fashion.
Exactly. So, Korra thinks it can do that, and the operative word is thinks, and it completely falls flat on its face. The first season wants to tackle things like racism, or I guess, or more like classism, essentially.
Yeah.
You have the benders and the non-benders. The show never makes that clear. You don't ever see any actual division and divisiveness between the benders and non-benders.
No Hoovervilles, no rundown quarter of the city where people are like living in squalor.
None of that. Season 2 has this whole thing about, wanted to essentially start a civil war between the northern and southern Water Tribe, to the point where the main characters, keep pushing for it in increasingly bloodthirsty and disturbing ways, to the point where I'm like, are we supposed to be liking these characters? And then it kind of just transitioned to this weird point about spirits. And season 2 is widely considered the worst season, and I would completely agree with that for a lot of reasons. Mainly because in the original show, the spirit world is such a clear distinction between the it's kind of both. It's its own distinct parallel world, but it's not like another dimension. It's more treated as if like it's a state of mind, a state of like where you go when like you've reached a certain like spiritual consciousness. It's not like another dimension with its own energy and power. And that's how Korra treats it. Korra treats it the same way like Digimon treats the digital world or something. It's a special world where they have cute little marketable creatures, little spirits, and they have special spirit energy that can be transformed to Dragon Ball Z Power Blasts. That is what.
We're not making this up.
No, this is how Korra chooses to treat the idea of spirituality in the most blunt and dumb way possible. And it also does the same thing with the concept of balance. Balance was such a thing in the original show that was so emphasized and so clear. Like, obviously, there's still a side of good and evil. There's always going to be good and evil, but there's still the idea that, like, it's not necessarily about good or evil. It's about what's balanced.
What it is.
Yes. There's always going to be good and there's always going to be evil. You can't get rid of evil. That's what the show makes clear. But you can at least keep it to a point where, like, we can keep it stable. Keep the playing field leveled. Korra just says, screw that. Here's an evil spirit named, what was his name?
Vaatu.
Thank you. Vaatu, who's a big black kite. And then you have the big white kite, who's an ice spirit named
Rava.
God, their names.
We could barely remember their names.
I don't ask me how I remember. I just do.
I'm
glad you do. Yeah, these two spirits who are just good and evil, and that's it. It is as dumbed down as humanly possible, and it's just like a brain dead monkey wrote it. And just all the ideas of Eastern mysticism, the ideas of like what good and evil are in the world about being balanced and chaos and order, are just completely thrown out the window for this really one-note, boring plot that thinks it's smarter than it is. So that's kind of as much as I want to get into the plot of the show, but yeah.
Well, I mean, it just like with how the world is set up and how that's kind of inextricably linked to how things look. The way that the environments are kind of inextricably linked with the plot in terms of the city and the places they go, or the places they don't go, rather. Same thing applies to the spirit world and how it's just kind of made much more materialistic. And just like the way he was describing it, it really is just like the digital world in Digimon or like fucking Narnia or something. 1,000,001 ways you could describe it. It is like a physical place with physical things. It's not a concept. It's not more of an idea as it was originally. And as a result, it becomes way less imaginative to the point where it's more or less converted into a resource. Very literally in the 4th season. And instead of having like all these interesting things that convey story points to you, like how they travel from one place, and I'm putting that in air quotes here, to another in the first show through the spirit world, where it kind of represents the points in time and memories and historical moments or ideas, inner conflicts and so forth, that kind of stuff. In this show, it's just a place with things in it.
Yeah,
it misses the point so fucking hard.
Like, you brought that up perfectly. Like, the weirdest thing about the spirit world and like the first show was that it was a hard thing to get like a pin on what it was, but it was somewhere that actually felt like otherworldly when he meets what's his name? I think it's Ko.
Yeah, Ko the Face Stealer.
That thing was fucking terrifying, by the way. But yeah, like the spirit world felt like almost a world parallel to the one we live in, but not separate.
Yes.
If that makes any sense. Things could kind of cross over and people could cross over, but it was always just kind of like otherworldly yet still here, if that made any sense. Because I remember like they tried the track Aang and what's her name? I forget her name, the one that had the beaver thing. And they're like, we can't find your friend, he's gone. Yeah.
Badger thing.
Yeah.
And they're like, you mean he's dead? She's like, no, he's gone. And so that made the spirit world seem like a place that was just kind of hard to define, but I liked that.
Yeah.
But now they just made it like, okay, yeah, it's like here. You can walk here.
Yeah,
fast travel through it.
The mystical nature of it's ruined.
Yeah.
Even in terms of like how it's visually designed too, it's just very uncreative when it comes to like well, for example, one of the times when they're first visiting it, they try to make it look all wacky. You know, here's these weird trees, and they're just like, oh, I guess those are lily pads. Okay.
If I'm brutally honest, I kind of can't remember a whole lot about it. I remember that whole thing where they had to go to the spirit world to fight Udalak, but there's so like little to say about the world other than it was like this weird, fucked up Alice in Wonderland bullshit where other stuff lived too. But it didn't feel like a mystic place at all. It felt like, I don't even really know how to put a description to it, but it didn't feel like something that the original show would have had in it, at least not seriously.
For sure. It feels very just kind of... The original show intertwined the spiritual nature of the world. It's like, it's not its own world. It's really implied to be part of us and part of the place we live in. It's like, it's so mixed into everything. Whereas these other shows, so just like, it's so obsessed with just making things as materialistic as possible, as tangible as possible. It's not about spiritual nature anymore, despite season 2 being all about spirits. It's just here. It's the place. It's as dumbed down as possible. You can just walk in there if you have a portal. That's it. It's not made. It doesn't feel special. It doesn't feel like thought out at all. It just feels like a big empty place with a bunch of little marketable creatures that we can make toys out of.
Bunch of Adventure Time extras.
Yes, that's all it feels like, and it's just so disappointing to see it turn into that. The other thing, and speaking of disappointing, is the music. It's the same people who worked on this one. Same. It's kind of a common running note, huh? Same guys, but then you would think they would do a good job, but whatever happened. But then, things change. So the music is so much more kind of not really there. Like, it's there, and it's not necessarily terrible, but it's so just underwhelming, and it doesn't really add to much. Early on, you kind of have this really jazzy, like, 1920s sort of setup, but then they kind of drop that pretty quickly. It doesn't really amount to anything.
It's really inappropriate, too, sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. It would be really ill-fitting. So now you're just seeing, like, well, the soundscape just feels so empty. And the sound design isn't terrible necessarily, but it's also just kind of nothing. It's what you'd expect. It's so by the numbers, and it's just like, oh, really? Okay.
Do you want to talk about the characters?
Well, for a general note about the characters, I'll say this. They're definitely pulling way more from anime. I know, and that's weird to say because all of it's animes and stuff, obviously, but when looking up interviews about the thing, I noticed, or like articles about Korra, is that people talk about Avatar and Airbender and say, obviously, you're pointing at the anime influence, but they didn't say it was anime. They didn't say it was like, this is anime, this is point, or like use particular examples of anime to point at, like, this is this thing, or this is that. No, it's just, here's an adventure show with an anime style. Korra is, every time people talk about it, they try to relate to Miyazaki or whatever light novel anime trash is popular at the time. And it really feels like the creators were getting so much more into the popular, more contemporary anime at the time. And they were saying, like, let's make our show more like this. We need to make it more like this kind of light novel, this more kind of more dramatic, more cinematic, more whatever word, that we can make it more serious, more like anime that's happening right now. And I think that's what fucking sunk it. It feels so much more like a really cheesy, crappy anime, and instead of its own unique sort of thing. And the characters perfectly reflect that in terms of how they look, because now they have the more boring, standardized visual anime design, where everyone's just, the only way you can tell them apart is by accessories, pretty much.
That A1 Pictures charm.
Yep, to the point where you'll look at some characters and they'll have close-ups, and sometimes we can tell them apart.
You're exactly right. Because I was making a joke about how Season 1 reminded me of Sword Art Online, but you're not even joking. Yeah, it does feel like a light novel adaptation, especially for Season 1 and 2.
Exactly. I don't watch, you said before, I don't watch much anime either, so but Family Point, I feel like if we looked and if we knew more, and maybe people out there will know, I'm sure if you looked and dug, you could probably find exact scenes where they're probably ripping off stuff pretty closely.
Yes. Speaking of accessorization, though, the other issue is that the character designs, especially in Korra herself, I mean, are way overcomplicated, and the whole philosophy of animation in this show is very different from the original, because the original used kind of a more minimalist design approach for its characters, but as a result, they had a lot more, more frames of animation, they were doing more, and the visuals flowed much more smoothly. Whereas in Korra, the only time that they ever have the ability to really flex and make the animation nice and smooth and fluid is when they're talking and standing still. And it's because the characters have too much shit going on.
Yes, they wanted to focus more on having these more detailed, well-rendered characters, which, isn't a bad thing, but, not when the budget they had, and and the time they had, and they definitely wanted to overcompensate with the character designs, and now you have far less movement as a result, because you can't move all those details all the time. Which is why, funny enough, when the show's budget got halved over time, you notice how they started looking, they got more compact, it was simpler to understand designs and moved a little better.
Yeah, especially in Season 4, they streamlined them down so much.
Yes.
But they moved a lot more as a result.
Yes.
Compare Zahir to Amon in terms of, character design. That's a perfect example of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Zahir has Amon has this big flowing robe and this kind of detailed mask and stuff, so he's not doing too much. Where you have Zahir who's moving around all the time because he just has robes on, he's got a bald head.
He's got a karate gi on, basically.
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. It's a lot simpler to animate. So, the character... So, I don't know, it's a lot of things like that. And also just the abundant use of CGI. I know you want to talk about the characters, but I just want to talk about that real fast. The abundant use of CGI, not in terms of just props, but in terms of just because you have these really shoddy, here's these ships and airships and stuff where it's all CGI'd, and it's really obnoxiously stand out. And there was some CGI in the original series, which was a little kind of not great looking, but it was off to the side in the most part, and it wasn't in a way that was distinctly obnoxious or anything like that.
Very sparing. Yes,
very sparingly. Here, it's all of every vehicle CGI in Korra. They do not hide it very well. You can see the vertices of some objects. The shading, a lot of the shading looks horrendous. Some things aren't even filled in. Yeah, the robots. Some things aren't even finished. It's just so bad and so obnoxiously standing out at every given moment. And there are moments where things will be standing still, and for some reason they just didn't draw them. They just CGI'd over them. They didn't even draw over the CGI. It's just what are they thinking? And then the other thing is that they use CGI for these kind of weird. It's only in season 1, really, to be fair, but it's still pretty bad. They have these crappy kind of panning shots where things spin around, and they're on this those stage from fucking old Tekken games where the shit spins around.
I was just about to say
because they don't have walls on the stage. It looks like that. It looks awful. There's a part where they fight these guys in the city, and the city's supposed to be a crowded place, but there's nothing around them. There's no buildings around them. And there's just this empty Pokemon fight area where they gotta hit each other. And it looks like complete crap because this ground the ground's all moving around, shifting. And it looks their 2D character assets don't mesh well with anything.
There are no extras.
Yeah, it's just terrible.
The spinning background deal got really bad during the pro bending matches, I noticed.
Yes.
It was hard to get an idea of just how big the ring really was during those.
Yeah, it's super obnoxious. So, Mang, I'll let you get into the characters a bit. Go for it.
Well, I know we kind of did a thing with Avatar. It was who's your favorite? Who stuck out to you? But I feel in order to really sort of dissect Korra down, it'd probably be best to just pick out who was the worst, who was the best, and why.
Sure.
Do we really want to start with Korra? I guess it would make sense to start with Korra, right?
Yeah.
But that's a huge can of worms. I'm getting the huge shit today. Okay.
Well, how about this? I like what you said. How about you just give us your favorite and give us your least favorite.
Yeah, in order to keep us from being here for a year, maybe that's probably the best.
We've been here
so
for 2
let me
already.
just give you my favorite character. It's gonna have to be Zahir. Straight up Zahir.
Okay.
He was a character who he made sense from the beginning in terms of what he wanted to do. Even if it was stupid, he wanted to do it. He got it done. He almost succeeded. His stupid little plan, it was okay, yeah, you're a high school anarchist, but you have an end game here.
Mm.
His whole thing didn't require a whole bunch of stupid shit to happen first, like with Unalak, or with Amon, or even Kuvira? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Yeah, even with her, it required them to do all this other bullshit first, assuming no one knew that they were a villain starting out. That's one thing I didn't really like about Korra was how these characters throw. I'm not a villain. I'm a good guy. Whoops. I was actually bad the whole time.
Yeah.
Haha.
And so it was
But
incredibly obvious.
Yeah. But with Zahir, it's just like, yeah, I'm gonna just fuck shit up with my best friends. Here we go. I'm gonna kill the Avatar.
Yeah.
It's gonna be really cool to watch. And he almost does it.
Yeah.
So I like Zahir because he comes off as an intelligent villain, but he doesn't come off as, what's the word I'm looking for? He doesn't come off as omnipotent, kind of like, oh, of course I'm here. I'm always one step ahead.
Exactly.
He really did seem like he had planned a whole lot of shit, and it works mostly because the characters are really stupid. But
yes.
And even though the way he became the bad guy is kind of like, oh wow, isn't that grossly inconvenient for everybody? How about that? Even then, it's like, he was one of the more straightforward characters. He didn't have like some kind of troubled past. He didn't like fucking Kuvira. He didn't have, or not even Kuvira, like Amon and Kuvira. He wasn't like, didn't have a stupid design like Unalaq did. He was just evil Aang. And you know what? I'm fine with that. I'm fine with just jerk-ass monk guy. And his friends, well, some of his friends were kind of cool.
The only unique benders in the show, for the most part.
Yeah.
The dude with the lava rocks was cool.
Yeah, that was a new power.
The girl with the water arms was not cool, but you know what? I didn't have a problem with her being on screen, so that is fine enough, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. The fight scenes with him are actually pretty good. Amon loses, I think, in his first major fight with Korra. I think they only have one?
Sort of, yeah. I guess they fight. They kind of squabble early on, but they actually have an actual fight at the end, and it kind of just ends with her just
throwing him out a window.
Yeah,
punches him out the window.
Yeah.
And Unalaq's fight goes on for way too long.
Yes, to the point of being obnoxious.
It goes on way too long, and Kuvira she starts out nigh fucking invulnerable up until she isn't.
Yeah.
You know, when the plot demands that she needs to lose to Korra. So, it was kind of refreshing to see Zahir take on a main character that wasn't Korra, and not completely body him when he fought, fucking Bryan Cranston.
Yeah, Tenzin.
Tenzin, yeah. When he fought him, and they were kind of, like, evenly matched, and that's the kind of thing that was rare in this show. I guess we didn't talk about that, and we were bound to talk about it at some point. This show has this really nasty thing to show how strong the villains are by making it so that the main characters get absolutely bodied in any fight scene. And it was really refreshing to see Zahir not completely wreck shit. I mean, he still won. He still wrecked shit. But it was an actual fight. So that was kind of fun to watch. The only reason he won is because he had Tenzin pinned down like 4-1.
Yeah, he had his friends to help. It took 4 people to take Tenzin on.
And then it had it so, like, in his first, like, major conflict with Team Avatar, he actually lost because he tried to capture Korra, and they worked together to make it work. And it was like, wow. And that's why I kind of prefaced this when I talked about it, I think, a little bit ago. But Season 3 is where this show actually got to be kind of interesting, and I think Zahir has a lot to do with that. It has more to do with how they decide to progress everything, but I liked him. So, the sad thing about it is there's not much to say about him. He's there. He's a villain. He does his job. He loses. It's not really all that great, and they kind of make him really stupid in the final season by bringing him back to help Korra for no reason. So, there's that. So, when we want to get into characters we don't like, I don't even think we need to go, around to say who's our least favorite character, because we already know who our least favorite character is. It's Korra. And I was actually been thinking about this for a couple of days, like, what makes Korra such a bad protagonist? And I realized the reason she's such a bad protagonist is why Katara was such a good side protagonist. There's probably a better word for that than that. But
Deuteragonist is the name?
Deuteragonist?
Deuter protagonist. There we go.
Deuter protagonist.
Deuter protagonist.
Yeah.
No.
But yeah, so Korra is very hot-blooded. She's very brash. She does shit without thinking. And that's fine for a character to start out like that. But she does the thing that almost every show needs to do whenever they need to have shit not work out and make a character that has powers not be able to get their way because they have powers. Instead of like, an Avatar where they wrote it so that they had to use them creatively, Korra could just kind of fire blast anything and typically it would work. So the creators are like, well, gee, we need to try to find a way to write this so that doesn't just completely wreck shit. So they do this by making antagonists that completely body her throughout the entire show. If you ever edit this and you decide to use visuals, just find a picture of Korra laying like flat down on the ground, because that's where she spends 60% of the show.
I'm gonna be out there for a while. It's yes, Korra is. I mean, most of the cast is, but Korra is the most woefully incompetent main character I've ever seen. Well, maybe not the most, but definitely one of them. It's so baffling to see how much like Aang like progresses as a character in the original series, and then see Korra continuously just reset and regress like endlessly. You're right. You have her arc where it's like, yeah, she's kind of a hothead and she's learned to not be that. That's fine as a main character. She's kind of the reverse of Aang. Aang is trying to be more, assertive, and she's trying to be less assertive and actually, like, be responsible and not, be up in people's face all the time.
Not be Korra.
Yeah, not be Korra. But the problem is, even when she learns the lesson, she just goes back to acting that way next season anyway. So,
or even the next episode.
So yeah. She's completely inconsistent, and she's just a complete jerk. And she's bad at her job. Season 1, she cannot defeat Amon without airbending, which she learns, not because she's more spiritual, which you need to be an airbender. No, she just gets really upset and then punches a blast of wind at him, which defeats him by accident. And then season 2, she loses to Unalaq and gets the Avatar state like nearly destroyed, and she destroys all the past connections to the old Avatars. So the next Avatar only has her to talk to, so isn't that great?
The world is doomed because of Korra.
Yes. So Korra is woefully incompetent constantly. She loses to Zahir, and gets poisoned, even though she learns metal bending, and for some reason the poison's administered through a form of metal. And for some reason,
it's mercury.
Yeah, it's mercury.
Yeah, mercury, and she doesn't think to bend it out. Somebody else has to do it for her. There's no Korra never has any actual victories in the show. Every other character does it for her, especially Jinora, who is like a mini girl Aang, sort of. It's one of 10 children, and she's the most competent and strongest character in the show. She's better spiritually connected than any other character in the show, and because of that, she manages to become a great airbender. She manages to help Korra defeat Unalaq, and she really just does it for her.
She bails Korra out 3 fucking times.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jinora has saved the world no fewer than 2 times.
Yes. It is because of Jinora that Korra is able to win any fights.
Korra cannot stop jobbing, and if you did an incapacitated Korra supercut, not only would it take you years to complete, but it would probably consist of several hours of footage.
In fact, here comes one right now.
Oh no!
It's such a shame, too, because I understand why they did that, or why they felt they had to. Because it's like, oh, well, Aang never really got hurt all that much, so we need to show...
Until he got struck by lightning.
We need to show Korra just getting her teeth kicked in, I guess. And, it's fine to have a character that kind of just has to get roughed up a bit, but she doesn't, win, and she kind of goes along every single fight doing the same basic shit. She never tries anything unique in a fight, at least not to my memory. I'm pretty sure you guys can remember at least something, but I'm having a hard time remembering her doing anything along the lines of what Aang would pull, like even in the first episode with the mattress trick. Korra never really does too much of that. And it doesn't really bother me so much that she loses. She loses less because, well, I guess they want us to feel like she loses because her opponents are stronger, but it just feels like she loses because she sucks.
Yes, it's not because she gets stronger or she has some kind of fatal weakness, or the characters are like that much stronger. She just acts incompetently despite having the tools to win. That's just it. When she fights Guvira, they try to pull some excuse of like, well, you're still scared of Zahir, but it's like, no, you're just bad at being an airbender. You're bad at being an avatar in any way. You don't think about things the way other characters do. There's no intelligence to how Korra fights. She constantly just brute forces everything. And that would be fine in season 1, again, where she's learning to not do that. Her getting her ass kicked early on would be fine. Because then it's just like, okay, I need to, obviously what I'm doing is not working. I need to get better. I need to improve. No, any victory she has is handed to her. And if it's not, she just completely eats shit. There's a hilarious moment we were watching where, there's a part where she has to chase down some thieves in season 4. And I joke that she's going to immediately eat shit in like 3 seconds. And then she immediately eats shit in 3 seconds. She trips and loses a bunch of 2 common thieves. And this is season 3. Season 4.
I mean...
Going back to where this dovetails with the visuals, too, Korra's incompetence is perfectly captured by the complete lack of choreography. It's almost as if the show is acknowledging just how lame everything that she's doing is, so she just jobs constantly.
Yes, she just punches and kicks, and there's nothing. I mean, everybody does it, but she's the most obvious about it. There's no finesse or any style to what she does. It's just bam, bam, bam,
punch, punch, punch.
Can I say one thing that I think is a highlight of this show, and I would argue that should have been the focus of this show if they wanted to take it in a different direction.
Okay.
I'm having trouble. Varric.
Yeah.
Varric
is the best character in the show.
Hands down, the best character in this show. And I would say that's saying a lot, but I think he would even be fine in Avatar, actually, thinking about it.
I agree. He would be a fitting... I mean, they have to retool some things, obviously, but he'd be a fitting inclusion to the original series.
Because they tried to have Bolin. He's a earthbender. He's supposed to be kind of like the Sokka-style character where he jokes around a lot. He's not very serious, and he kind of just serves as a comic relief. But he kind of fails because his comic relief kind of just feels as a punctuation for more serious moments. And he just interjects with shit that really isn't funny. A lot of his jokes miss the mark, and he says kind of just some Captain Obvious shit sometimes. Varric, on the other hand, is actually funny. His demeanor, even when he's being, kind of funny, kind of goofy, it never feels like a contrast to what's actually going on in a situation. There's, I think in season 4, a life or death situation where he and Bolin are being forced to create a bomb. No, they're being forced to create a weapon a laser weapon that they superimpose into a bomb, and Varric is just like, all right, I'm gonna blow this shit up if you don't get on the other side of the train. And the guy's like, you won't do it. And he's just like, I won't, will I? Well, I've already said to go off in 3 minutes. And it's both kind of tense, but really funny, too. And it's so crazy, because he's sitting next to the actual, Bolin, the actual, comic relief character, and is making better jokes than he did in a couple of seconds than he did throughout the whole series. And on top of that, not only is he really funny, he seems like the kind of character in this kind of show would make it seem like, oh, he's actually just an idiot and he's just talking smart. No, Varric is actually really smart. He's like the inventor of the movie reel in that universe.
He invents film.
He invents film. Even though he tries to they kind of frame him as a villain in the 2nd season, but I think the whole idea, I think, was he was just trying to basically find a shortcut through this. He was trying to find a shortcut through President Raiko because he wouldn't send his dues, so he was just going to shortcut through it so he didn't have to deal with this shit. And chances are it probably would have worked, but he ended up in prison anyway. But part of me, I was talking to a couple of people, was like, why did they make him a villain? That makes him, not a competent, protagonist now. But then I was like, oh, they're going to do this with him, and then I started to like him again. I didn't mind him being a villain. I just disliked this show's villains, and I hate to see a good character become one. But it feels like a completely different person wrote him versus every other character. Because even in the scene where we learn that he's a villain, he still acts like Varric. He's still making these stupid little quips. When the characters leave the room, they don't do the thing where it zooms in on their face and they make a smirk. He's just making a comment about how he's got to get his corns checked out or something. He feels like Lupin the Third, in a sense.
Yes.
And
it kind of even looks a little similar.
Yeah, they look kind of similar. I wouldn't be surprised if they were inspired by him. But every single time he shows up, he's actually kind of contributing to the success of the team more than Korra does sometimes. And
pretty much.
it makes pretty much half the time, and it makes me sad that he's used less than fucking Mako. And I'm pretty sure one of you wants to talk about Mako, but I think that Varric was... I don't even want to call him underused, really, because I think that the extent that they used him worked. I just feel like he should have been the main character for all intents and purposes. He was the best character on the show. I liked Zahir because he made season 3 watchable, but I liked Varric because of he's like a fucking diamond in the rough.
Yeah, he could have easily been, if in another universe where this was a different show of some kind, he could have easily been the main character, or at least a good supporting character to a better cast. So, I'm honestly not going to talk much about Mako. Most of the cast.
What could you say about him?
Yeah, there's nothing to talk about. The only thing I'll say about Mako is that it's upsetting that they based his name off the guy who played Iroh, who was an amazing voice actor, and sad that he passed away. And it's cool they made a tribute to him. I just wish it wasn't such a lame ass character.
All he is just Roger Smith from Big O with a very tacky outfit,
no worst design,
no personality, and he doesn't accomplish anything. He's just a bit of a loser, and like even Bolin's really lame. But guess who elevates him?
Varric.
Anytime they're together, they're great.
Yeah. So, I guess that's really about it. Korra's just Avatar's just an amazing series, and Korra is just completely worthless entry. It does not add anything new. And in fact, because of the way Avatar 1 is set up, which I'll briefly get into, which is probably... Korra looks so visually boring for most of it, and the only visually standout stuff was the Avatar 1 little segment in the middle of season 2.
Oh, the wand segment?
Which looks great, and has its own little visual style, and that's it feels more mystical and Asian. But then they goof it up by having this horrible backstory that completely reduces all the elements of Avatar that makes it so interesting. People didn't learn bending from animals. No, they just learned it from the lion, because the lion turtles let them borrow it. Spirits, this is also what establishes that the spirits are like this weird Digimon world. All these little stupid things, or like how the Avatar spirit is actually a literal spirit that's a representation of good and
white kite.
Bad.
It's a god. It's God.
It's God. It's so painfully transparent. It's kind of, you have God and you have Satan. It's bad, and it just completely ruins the cool things with the original. So honestly, I would say if you're really interested in Korra, I guess you could torture yourself with it. It's longer. I mean, it's shorter than the original series, but it feels longer because of how poorly done it is.
It's shorter.
It's about 10 episodes shorter. Yeah, I would say it's about 10 episodes shorter.
Wow.
It feels years longer.
Yes, it is complete and total train wreck, and it's not worth anybody's time. That is pretty much my view of it. And in fact, watching it actively makes elements of the original series worse. So,
watch season 3. It's watchable.
Yes, that's the only thing I would recommend. I wouldn't even say season 3 is amazing, but it definitely has some moments of fun and some levity, and the villains are kind of, even if they're a little underbaked, at least they're not as obnoxious as the other villains from the other seasons.
It's got a prison breakout episode. That's actually good.
That's fun.
Well, the thing that I was meaning to call attention to earlier, and we didn't quite get to it, talking about things that the show does poorly, you brought up the CGI stuff, which is most often in the background, but what about the backgrounds themselves?
Oh, gosh, you're right. I was about to wrap it up without talking about that.
Yeah, getting back to the visuals, the backgrounds in Korra range from nearly passable to actually fucking terrible.
They're just work in progresses.
Yeah, YouTube speed paints,
Yeah.
They look like that, but you zoomed in on it, which you're not supposed to do. A speed paint looks good when you're zoomed out because you're just kind of scribbling stuff in, but when you zoom out, it kind of comes together. No, you're gonna get all the gory details of that speed paint.
You can see the JPEG artifacting in some of them, I think.
There's flat elements of like there's a part where there's like a bear rug and it's completely flat texture on the ground. It's like, what happened?
Yeah, backgrounds that have fucked up perspective, backgrounds that just don't look finished. The other thing, too, which is a persistent problem throughout the entire series, is that its sense of color is downright pathetic. And going back to the whole thing of them borrowing elements from contemporary anime, it has the palette of a contemporary anime. Everything's washed the fuck out and, like, really desaturated and kind of monochrome, but not in a neat kind of, Kawajiri way.
Yeah.
Because he could make that stuff work because he knew what contrast was.
Or like it's because it's the 1920s. You think they go for let's go for like a muted sepia kind of thing. But no, they don't even do that.
Yeah, like a foggy, smoggy city. No, even in situations where it would be appropriate for it to be kind of a monochrome environment, it just looks lame and bad because their sense of contrast and sense of color is so fucking poor. Like, right there in the first episode, we're thrown into this, like, police office. There's, like, an interrogation room of some kind. You have Not Toph there talking to Korra and basically saying, you're an idiot for causing millions of dollars in property damage trying to capture 3 guys. And while this is going on, we're looking at this background that just looks like I opened up Photoshop and smeared some crap around and made it look kind of like metal walls and a table with a light fixture. And little did we know, we were only just getting started.
It looks just hideous at every given moment. And the backgrounds they were showing like amazingly stand up, but they did their job. They're fine. They accomplished what they needed to do. And it's like, I have no complaints about them pretty much. They could look better, of course, but they're not bad.
It's lame, horribly designed architecture represented by very poorly done backgrounds that just look incompetent.
In Korra.
Yeah, Korra.
In the original, you have interesting environments that are done, at worst, passively.
Yes. Like, the background art's fine.
Yeah.
It's like, I have no complaints.
They never stood out. Like, I never saw, like, an Avatar in background. A background in Avatar, I was like, ugh, well, maybe that could have done a little bit longer. But everything is passable to gorgeous. In Korra, it's just, everything is passable to CG.
Yeah, it looks really just artificial and bad, or just the color choices are terrible. And just the brushwork is so amateur. It feels like it's done so fast. And that's another credence to the idea that this show was cranked out as quick as possible.
Like, I think that if they would have worked on those backgrounds for a little longer than 5 minutes, they might have had something.
Yeah, that could have probably been fine.
But the color issues extend all the way to the characters.
Yes.
Every single thing in the show has this really, really lousy color theory to it. And it's just... I'm not an expert about this shit, but compare the two... You see how vibrant the first one looks without looking candy-colored or, like, oversaturated, blown out. It feels very appropriate. Things pop from the frame. It just looks good. And then you look at this show, and it's a big pile of crap because all the saturation has been sucked out of it.
Yeah. It's so just bland and, like, just lacking in any, like, type of personality to it. There's lots of gray in this, too. Like, it's like, characters wear more gray, characters are more gray in their hair. It just feels like, really?
In an odd way, it is kind of representative of the show.
Yeah, I guess so.
Wow.
I don't know.
Korra.
Oh, we've been joined by our third co-host, Cricket.
Hopefully he doesn't pick that up.
Play him off, Cricket.
Yeah. Play him off, Cricket. Alright, well, is there really much else to say?
Watch Avatar.
Yeah, watch Avatar, and I think that I covered most of the stuff that I was wanting to go over with the design. I mean, if I really wanted to break it down that much more, I could probably be here for a while.
Yeah.
We're kind of pushing the 3-hour mark.
Yeah, we've already been here for a little too long. The one other thing I was going to say, though, just on the subject of the vehicle design, which is the thing that I keep harping on. You remember how the Fire Nation's balloons were kind of interesting?
Yeah.
You know how this show just kind of has them everywhere for no reason?
Okay.
Wouldn't it have been interesting, again, just going back to this point, to see how they might have done things in this world? Don't you think it would have been better to have something other than just, here's a shitty CGI blimp right in the center of the frame for no fucking reason?
Or a literal Jeep in one episode?
Yes, they call it a Jeep, they don't call it a buggy, they don't call it anything else.
To be fair, would you really want to watch that happen? Because we saw how they made electricity in that show. Do you really want to see how they made some of the shit
they would have made it lame in another way.
They just have a guy who's a firebender but can do electricity, because I guess everyone can do that now, despite the fact that it's an extreme risk to your own life. Just have him point at it.
Yeah.
Just point at it. Bzzzt. He's like, hey, yo, Tony, you going down to the fucking electric factory tomorrow?
Yeah. You just have guys poking a machine and zapping it.
It's so just like, really...
God, that's right. We talked about that. And not to harp on this too long, but that's another thing you talk about, missed opportunities. You have people who are literally benders who work day and night to keep the city working. They have to zap the thing. And this whole guy with benders and non-benders are not equal. And that could have been a thing, like people were taking advantage of the Bender's powers or something, kind of like a 180 off of shit that happened in the original series where the Fire Nation, like Benders, were taking advantage of everyone else. But nothing. No. Oh man, we could honestly go for hours about the missed opportunity things in this show, but it really bothered me just how non-special bending was, but not non-special in the sense that it's like everyone can do it, so we can do crazy shit with it, but it's more like everyone can do it, so who gives a shit?
Exactly. Like, even like semi-neat ideas that don't even get fleshed out. Like you have metal bending invented in The Last Airbender by Toph. It's like, yeah, that's cool. So it's like, okay, now we have metal bending cops. All right, sick. No, they do nothing. They do nothing interesting. And this weird thing is that for some reason, you think about it, like, that sounds cool, a metal bending police force, but then you're like, first of all, they're lame, and second, why wouldn't there be other cops? I mean, there are other cops, to be fair, but like, why isn't the main police force just like several different different types of benders? It's like, you can have a water bender and fucking fuck up the sewers and like shoot water people. You have a fire bender. There's so many things you could do for like a police force of benders, and they don't even take that concept anywhere.
The worst part, they already had something like that, the Dai Li.
Yeah, exactly.
Who are in this show, who are still cool.
Yeah, they're still cooler than anybody, the actual meta bending police.
Yeah, I know that point sounded kind of redundant. I mean, we're flying on fumes here, so I apologize, but
it's fine.
It's more just the missed opportunities are so obvious that I don't like to go in and just be like, I would make a good show. But it's like, just think about it for more than 5 seconds and you see like how interesting things could have been. And that's the most frustrating thing about this show. Out of everything else, not just how incompetent it is and how badly written it is and how ugly it looks and how awful the choreography and everything else is, but the fact that it could have been better. It did not have to be this. It didn't even have to be as good as The Last Airbender, and it probably wouldn't have been even if it was good.
Yeah.
But it could have been good.
It could have been its own thing and done something unique and interesting, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
All it does is it exists, it's there, and it brings down the original via the stupid fucking Rava Batu shit.
Yes.
But at least perverts get to see Korra get the shit kicked out of her 50,000 times.
I don't even think they like it, man.
Yeah, I feel like they begin to kick somewhere else. It's too much crap to sit through. So, all right, I think we've had like a billion false endings, so this is the actual one, I think, because we're pushing through.
Yeah.
We're dying.
All right. Well, that's pretty much it. So, Avatar: Last Airbender, you can catch that on Blu-ray. It's a great series. If you've never seen it somehow, please, Lil God, watch it.
Yeah.
And
you
Korra,
won't regret it.
Yes, and Korra, you can get that on a bunch of different streaming services have it. Amazon has it. If you really want to suffer that badly, you can get it on DVD. There's lots of places have it. Nick had it on their site. Nickelodeon had it on their site for a while. They might still. I'm not sure. I would look into it. But yeah, so Mang, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh no, thanks for having me, man. This was a blast.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely have you on another time. Well, that was me and Mod,
and I'm Failmore,
and I'm Mang,
and we'll catch you next time.
This has been Termites.
See you around, motherfuckers.